more integrated. And I think that the choice that was made to introduce the deep recce strike capability within the 3rd Armoured Division is absolutely game-changing and what is required. If you look at the deprioritisation of the close fight that we have seen in Nagorno-Karabakh, in northern Syria, and now in Ukraine, the ability to strike precisely in depth and attrit your enemy whilst they are moving towards you is the key defining characteristic of the modern land battle, and that's what the Deep Recce Strike Brigade is going to get after.
Well, the heart of our UK commitment to NATO is indeed a fully capable warfighting division, which the former Chief of Defence Staff said is the standard whereby a credible army is judged. So why will this modernised warfighting 3rd Division not be delivered until 2030? Why did ministers decide it will be built around Ajax when they knew about the deep-seated problems? And why, when it took the German Chancellor just 3 days to overturn decades of defence policy and boost defence spending by €100 billion, why does the NAO say UK ministers could take another 9 months even decide whether to stick with or scrap Ajax?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman knows that candour is the name of the game whenever I'm giving things. I think there's things that both sides of the House could reflect on as to quite why our army has the age of kit that it has. There have been a number of missed opportunities by governments from both sides of the House to make decisions to renew the army's equipment inventory over the last 20 or 30 years that weren't taken. The reality is that the army has been redesigned to meet the threat as it now is, and I think that 2 armoured infantry or strike brigades with a deep recce strike brigade is exactly what a modern warfighting division should look like. And actually within NATO there are discussions around how the NATO force needs to transform in order to meet the modern threat.
Crosby.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to answer this question with 6, 12 and 18. Recent estimates show MOD investment supporting over 200,000 jobs across the UK. Continued investment in defence, along with the changes we are making as part of the Defence and Security Industrial Strategy, will contribute to further economic growth and prosperity, including jobs across the Union.
Crosby.
Mr. Speaker, BAE Systems at RF Valley in my constituency of Arnismorn is hoping to hear the news about a long-term contract providing security to hundreds of workers, and these are high-value jobs that underpin our sovereign UK defence capability. These technical and engineering roles provide maintenance to the RAF Hawk T2 fleet and support our future fighter pilots. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that this forthcoming contract is great news for Anglesey and great news for our UK security in these challenging times?
Mr. Speaker, I can't comment about specific contracts, but I can confirm they are indeed high-value jobs performing a very important role for our armed forces. My honourable friend has been absolutely assiduous in pushing the case for defence jobs in her constituency, and I hope to be making an announcement shortly.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree that the current dreadful situation in Ukraine means we need to be very focused on our defence supply chains, buying and using British where possible, and further supporting the economies of areas like Redcar and Cleveland?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Through DCIS we are focused. We are already focused, and it's given renewed impetus to ensuring our critical defence supply chains. Specifically on steel, as he mentions his home patch, while it is for the prime contractors to place orders, these are all flagged well in advance with UK industry. Unfortunately, there are occasions, we've had it recently, when specific types of steel we require are not being produced in the UK. I would urge UK manufacturers to really explore these opportunities. We are very keen to see them do so.
David Duke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be familiar with the company Score, a major supplier of valves across different industries, but also for naval vessels in my constituency. So therefore, can I invite the Minister to see for himself the fantastic facilities, technology, expertise, including the award-winning apprenticeship schemes employed by the single largest employer in my constituency of Banff and Buchan?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our increase in naval procurement benefits jobs throughout the UK, and I'm delighted to hear of Score's apprenticeship scheme building talent for the future, and I will be keen to visit. The UK Government's shipbuilding programme is providing a great success in supporting Scottish jobs, unlike it appears that of other governments, with which my honourable friend, as a Scottish member, may be familiar.
William Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the MOD's recently acquired stake in Sheffield Forge Masters, I know my honourable friend understands the important role of the UK steel industry in our national security. So what consideration has he given to the opportunities for greater integration and collaboration on defence manufacturing between forge masters and other steel producers like Stocksbridge Speciality Steels in my constituency, and he's also welcome to visit, and this collaboration could of course benefit both jobs and security?
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am aware of the company in my honourable friend's constituency. Look, we did take the unusual decision, it is unusual, to acquire Sheffield Forge Masters to secure its unique capability to supply specialist, large-scale, high-integrity steel components. They're vital to defence programmes. Look, ultimately, it's for companies to manage commercial decisions for their future. However, to improve engagement, the Business Secretary reformed the UK Steel Council in 2021, which offers a forum for government, industry and trade unions to work in partnership on what is absolutely a shared objective for UK steel to have a competitive and sustainable future.
Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Aircraft Research Association in Bedford are the only UK-based facility capable of testing our future military aircrafts and components. Yet they are at risk of closure due to the change in electricity costs. Ofgem have stated that only the government can introduce an exemption scheme which would save the company and prevent the UK being reliant on foreign states to test our aircrafts. So will the Minister urgently meet with myself and ARA to discuss a way forward that protects our national security?
I am willing to meet the honourable gentleman, if that is helpful. I have to warn him that we are aware of the situation, we're aware of the capabilities that we need, so I'm happy to speak to him and take it from there. Happy to meet him.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think many of us have been surprised or enlightened by the performance of the Bayraktar TB2 in Ukraine. What sort of message does this send to UK strategy, but also to our procurement?
Happily, we were ahead of the game. It is part of the thing that we were part of the discussion we had as part of the IR. There are active processes in place both to test UAVs and indeed counter UAV technologies. We're very aware of it. Both this and also previous conflicts throw into sharp relief quite how effective these weapon systems can be.
Mr. Speaker, I have David Brown Gears, Reliance Engineering, some very important manufacturers who supply the defence sector. What they would like to know, what is the future for their business? You know, with the government that is going to reduce the size of our armed forces to 72,000, and last week's mini-budget gave no extra funding to the defence. If Vladimir Putin is watching the parliamentary channel, what does he think he's thinking today?
Well, I'm delighted to say, Mr. Speaker, that the last time I visited, I don't know whether Mr. Putin will be watching us today. I'd like to say some robust things if he is. But I'd like to give some reassurance to the honourable gentleman. The last time I visited David Brown, they were hard at work on components for the Type 26, a programme which, as the honourable gentleman knows, we are committed to, and where there's also many export orders. They are hard at work producing really valuable bits of kit for the UK, and I hope, in due course, our allies.
Right, let's come to Shadow Minister Chris Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK shipbuilding accounts for 42,600 jobs. Yet the government continually fails to protect this vital industry and highly skilled jobs by refusing to build British by default. Can the Minister give me one good reason why we cannot guarantee all future naval ships procured by this government are built in Britain using British steel?
Yes, I can give him many more than one good reason as to why we have the strategy that we do. But just to name one of them, look at Type 31, Mr. Speaker. A fantastic British export success. Poland, Indonesia, there will be others, I'm convinced, in due course. That was built with the support of an international consortium. We've got the very best in the world. It's now based firmly in the UK, with a lot of it a UK supply chain, and that is giving the very best opportunity for UK jobs and UK shipbuilders to thrive in an international and competitive way.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Question 3, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, of course, we have an absolutely zero-tolerance approach to violence against women across defence, and our actions across education, training and the service justice system reflect that. Women can and do have brilliant careers right across defence, and the role models of senior women leaders across all three services reflect that.
Wendy Chamberlain.
My constituent had been living in the Armed Forces base in my constituency with her partner and children for whom she was their primary carer. During that time, she experienced continued domestic abuse, and when she took the brave step of leaving her partner, she was told by the base she'd be required to leave. As a result, she was made homeless and concerningly has had to leave her 2 very small children with her partner on the base. Now, whilst commitments to end violence in the first place are of course crucial, there will always be circumstances where it takes place. So I ask him, what support can his department put in place for those who suffer domestic abuse and their dependents whilst living within the Armed Forces community?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very moved to hear about the experiences of her constituent. If she would like to approach me with more details, I'm certainly very happy to look at that case again. But I would reassure that we have had a countering domestic abuse strategy across defence since 2018, and I look forward to updating the House in due course about our strategy for tackling rape and serious sexual offences across defence.
Drew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that we train all our military personnel in the to be able to be extremely violent when the situation requires, but we also train them to have the self-discipline to control that aggression, and that any breach of that discipline, whether perpetrated against male or female victims, needs to be dealt with expeditiously and seriously through military law?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. And the point is that that's all the more the case, given that women occupy every role right across defence, quite rightly.
Andrew Gwynn.
Question number 4, sir.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to answer questions 4 and 16 together. We are currently supplying significant air power to NATO's eastern flank, as well as sending ships to the eastern Mediterranean. We have a well-established and enduring contribution to the NATO Enhanced Forward Presence battle group in the Baltics and in Poland. In recent weeks, we have almost doubled our military forces in Estonia to demonstrate this capability and our resolve to support that region.
Andrew Gwynn.
Can I thank the Minister, because the UK is absolutely right to bolster support to our NATO allies bordering Russia. And NATO is absolutely right in condemning Putin's illegal and atrocious actions in Ukraine. We on this side of the House stand shoulder to shoulder in upholding democracy, freedom, the rule of law and security. Now, of course, modern warfare isn't just about troops, weapons and equipment, so what more are we doing to work with our allies across NATO in strengthening cyber resilience in the alliance?
Well, Mr. Speaker, NATO is acutely aware that the threat has evolved beyond the 3 conventional domains and into space and cyberspace as well. That's why it's a key part of NATO's transformation plans. The UK is to the fore in that, because I think we've invested ahead of many of our allies in both defensive and offensive cyber capabilities. So the UK voice is very much to the fore in discussing with NATO how we develop a cyber capability for the alliance.
Sir Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't one of the lessons of the brutal aggression of Russia in Ukraine that the decision by the Baltic states to join NATO was the right one? Aggression in Ukraine isn't a vindication of NATO's expansion, it's a vindication of the Baltic states joining our military alliance. But isn't there a lesson for all NATO powers, including our own? We have to think again about how much we're prepared to spend on defence.
So, Mr. Speaker, make absolutely no mistake, the membership of NATO by our great friends and allies in the Baltic is one of the great strengthening moments of the alliance generally, and nobody's prouder to fly the NATO flag than Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania, and we stand full square behind them and behind what it would mean if President Putin was to try to compromise the territorial integrity of those countries in any way. As for his wider question about resourcing defence across the alliance adequately, I strongly agree. I mean, we are one of only a few countries that has been routinely spending the 2% of GDP target. It's fantastic that this moment of challenge within the Euro-Atlantic has meant that other countries have now increased their spending to meet that target too. If there are arguments for more money for defence, no defence minister is ever going to object, but we should reflect that in this country, the UK has been spending 2% for a while and was given a very significant uplift from the Treasury only 12 months ago.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend the United Kingdom for all it's doing to help our NATO allies, but from one soldier to another, May I ask him, he said earlier, if circumstances change, the policy changes. And I do not excuse myself for asking again for the government to rethink to the cut to the army. What he referred to earlier was out-of-area type operations, now looking potentially, God forbid, at a conventional war where mass is going to be important. We no longer have that mass, and it must be retained.
So the honourable gentleman and I will debate keenly, I know, the future of the land battle, but I'm just not sure that what I've seen on our TV screens over the last few weeks has been a justification for large amounts of massed armour. I think that it is entirely a vindication of a change in the way that the land battle is prosecuted, where actually if you mass forces, they are vulnerable to missile technologies that are absolutely in the ascendancy. I think that Future Soldier and the IR that gave birth to it is exactly the right way to be developing the army in order to meet the land battle as it is now, not perhaps how we thought it was 20 years ago.
Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supporting NATO allies is not just about the Eastern Front and situation in and around Russia, but also about the threat from Russian naval activity. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that the focus must equally be on the activities that Russian submarines are taking place in the North Atlantic around our allied coast, and that the Navy must equally be given consideration in our strategic strength moving forward?
Mr. Speaker, well, submarine operations in the North Atlantic are not routinely spoken about in public, but the honourable gentleman, I'm sure, will be reassured to know that we are acutely aware that you must maintain your awareness of what Russia is doing in the whole Euro-Atlantic, not just be focused on the obvious point of conflict in Ukraine. There is a belligerence to the way that Russia is doing its business right now, which means that this is a time for maximum vigilance for the UK and the alliance, so that we make sure that all threats to the homeland are properly countered.
Right, Shadow Minister Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour's commitment to NATO is unshakable. We support the provision of lethal aid to Ukraine, and we back the bolstering of defences for our allies on NATO's eastern front. The government has already deployed various assets, including Royal Navy ships from Devonport that I'm proud to represent. But can the Minister set out what further forces are being prepared for deployment to our NATO allies? And can he say whether the cost of that deployment is coming from already strained Ministry of Defence budgets, or whether it will be met from the Treasury Reserve, as was the case during the last Labour government?
So, Mr. Speaker, there's a constant regeneration of forces as two battle groups are committed to Estonia. More battle groups need to embark on the training pipeline in order to make sure that we have contingent land forces at readiness. Similarly, ships have been deployed to the two NATO standing maritime groups, and to exercise cold response, we continue to generate further ships to give more choice on further options thereafter, if requested by the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. And similarly with Typhoon and F-35, there's a large amount committed as part of the initial response force. But if SACEUR asks for more, we are generating more to have those at our disposal. The honourable gentleman asks about the money right now. All of it seems to be being met by the Treasury, but long may that continue.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that we should be helping the Ukrainian armed forces by all legitimate means short of war, will ministers press our NATO allies that the rather artificial distinction between defensive and offensive weaponry should be swept away when requests for equipment are received, because when you're fighting on your own territory, having been invaded, all your weaponry is defensive?
Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman makes an excellent point. I think it suits our purpose to refer to the equipment that we are providing in the context of the defensive role it can play. But Defence Intelligence over the weekend reflected on the fact that the armoured column to the northwest of Kyiv has indeed been pushed back in recent days. That's been pushed back because small bands of determined people are manoeuvring with weapon systems that are lethal, and that is forcing the Russians to move back into a place where they feel they can defend themselves better. So these are defensive bits of equipment. That, I think, is the right message to send to the Kremlin. If, in the ingenuity of the Ukrainian armed forces, they do something more, then that's good on Ukraine.
Now we come to SNP spokesperson Stuart M. McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, can I, on behalf of these benches, welcome the letter from Speaker Stefanchuk to this House also. Mr. Speaker, the last time I exchanged with the Secretary of State, albeit he can't be with us this afternoon, it was in relation to the NATO strategic concept, and he said to me at that point, when I asked about the government's...
I don't know. Can I just remind people you have to stay for two full questions after the question you've asked. Too many members have asked a question already left, so can I just remind people, please wait 2 full questions, show the courtesy of the House. You've had the benefit of a question. Sorry to interrupt you, but I need to get it on record.
Especially so when I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker. But when I last spoke to the Secretary of State across the floor of the House, I asked about the upcoming NATO strategic concept, second in importance only to the Washington Treaty itself. Can I ask the Minister specifically about that? Is that still planned to be happening in June, or will the timetable for that move because of Russia's war on Ukraine? And in terms of what we can expect to see from that, will we have the government's Arctic strategy before then? And in terms of containing Russia, the Secretary of State said at our last exchange he planned to have a conversation with Sakar about that very issue. Can the government tell us what its priorities will be for containment of Russia going forward?
Your Honourable General, I have to accept my apologies, but so important is the NATO strategic concept that I'm afraid it is very much something that the Secretary of State works on with the team immediately around him. He'll need to write to the Honourable Gentleman the detail that he asks for.
Stuart Malcolm, right now.
Well, I'm always happy to write, Mr. Speaker, but perhaps then I could, from that, take the Minister to an important issue. NATO's clearly focused on bolstering its own defences. It's focused on supporting Ukraine militarily. Several NATO and non-NATO member states are supported on doing the same, plus supporting Ukraine economically. But Ukraine will require Marshall Plan levels of rebuilding and international cooperation and support across NATO countries, across EU countries and countries further afield. Can he enlighten the House as to what discussions are taking place in NATO, specifically with the focus to helping that country rebuild? Because this war will come to an end eventually, and our friendship must continue the day after.
So, Mr. Speaker, I think that the discussions in NATO very much focus on the Euro-Atlantic security implications of this conflict and what the situation may be after it is completed. I think that the wider sort of geopolitical discussion, the economic plan, amongst other things that the Honourable Gentleman rightly asks for, are things that may be being discussed within NATO, but I don't think they are the focus of NATO discussions. I think they're much more the focus of discussions within the G7, the EU, and within other ad hoc groupings that are coming together in order to worry about exactly what's next.
Please, Villiers.
Question number 7, please, sir.
Mr. Speaker, in recent months, the Secretary of State has met with his NATO counterparts twice in Brussels and travelled to over a dozen European capitals. The UK is standing by its commitments to our NATO allies, acting to provide reassurance to allies and partners. The UK has doubled its NATO presence in Estonia, and the deployment of Royal Marines is now in Poland on a bilateral basis.
Please, Villiers.
Government cooperate with NATO allies to continue the flow of lethal aid to the Ukrainian armed forces, including weapons such as Starstreak to defend against aircraft attacks.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't take the opportunity in the previous question, but the Right Honourable Lady gives me the opportunity here to make an important distinction that NATO is not the provider of lethal aid into the conflict in Ukraine. NATO is looking at how it doubles down on its eastern flank in order to contain the violence within Ukraine and so show the resolve of NATO countries to stand up for Article 5. Those who are donating lethal aid and non-lethal aid to Ukraine are doing so bilaterally, and it is through the UK leadership that a lot of that is being coordinated and delivered. The next donor conference that was convened by the Secretary of State will happen later this week. We're ambitious for even more countries to join the donor group at that stage.
Luke Dunn.
And number 8.
Mr. Speaker, the integrated review outlined that Defence forces must prepare for most persistent global engagement and constant campaigning to counter emerging threats. We're continuing to monitor the situation in Ukraine to ensure we remain threat-led and in line with the agile planning and delivery mechanisms developed following the IR. We will continue to review our capabilities and readiness levels accordingly.
Philip Dunn.
Speaker, as NATO nations last week committed to forced deployments to 4 member states in Eastern Europe to help demonstrate resolve to Russia at this dangerous time, does he not agree that now is not the time to reduce force strength of the British Army by 9,500 regular soldiers, and this aspect of the integration review conclusions should at the very least be deferred and at best be reversed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is an expert in the field, and so I acknowledge that this is something that would be keenly debated and that he has a very strong view on. My reflection is that this is the right time to accelerate the acquisition of the lethality that has been missing from the field army for too long. We are outranged on our artillery. We lack the land precision fires that are now absolutely essential. And if I was to have to choose, and I think the Ministry of Defence has had to choose, I would choose to have a land force that has been modernised and made relevant again to the modern battle, rather than necessarily stand behind larger numbers.
Dave Caroline.
Number 9, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to have regular discussions with colleagues across government on our Veterans Strategy Action Plan, and this contains over 60 policy commitments amounting to £70 million of additional investment on priorities including employment, data, skills and healthcare. And we continue to work closely with government departments, research, academics and service charities at all levels to deliver its commitments.
Dave Caroline.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just under 10% of the working age population of my Gosport constituency are veterans, so we take a keen interest in the Veterans Strategy Action Plan, and it is excellent. However, 96% of veterans make a successful transition to a civilian career within 6 months of leaving. And it isn't until page 32 that the plan talks about promoting a positive image of our veterans. So can we change the headline here, that service veterans are excellent people to employ?
Mr. Speaker, well, she affords me a useful opportunity to make exactly that point, and I should firstly thank her for the magnificent work she does in support of her armed forces community and veterans in Gosport. And the reason, Mr. Speaker, there's such high demand for veterans in all sectors is that they make brilliant employees, and if you're in the armed forces, military service does indeed give you skills for life.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that pursuing a Commonwealth veteran for 36 grand in NHS costs is not part of the MOD strategy. So does the Minister agree with me that it's wrong that someone who served our country, who's risked their life in Iraq and Afghanistan, is being treated in this way? And if the Minister does think it's wrong, will he work with me and others to put it right?
Well, I do agree that it's wrong, and I look forward to updating him personally about that case in particular.
Shadow Minister Stephanie Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Veteran Strategy commits to ending veteran rough sleeping by the end of 2024. Can the Minister tell the House how many veterans are currently sleeping rough? And if he can't, how does he intend on meeting that target when he has no plan, no resources and no data?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we do have a plan, and it's reflected in the fact that the covenant is now deliverable right across local authorities. It now has teeth through the statutory guidance that we have delivered and legislated for the first time ever. So I think actually at local authority level, which is where these services are delivered, we have brought real tangible change, of which we can be very proud.
Number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Britain was the first European country to supply lethal aid to Ukraine. The UK has so far delivered over 4,000 NLAW anti-tank weapons, Javelin anti-tank systems, and committed to provide Starstreak missiles. We will continue to deliver more. We have also delivered non-lethal aid in the form of body armour, helmets, boots, ration packs, rangefinders and communications equipment.
Fletcher.
The recent announcement of 6,000 additional missiles going to Ukraine, and indeed I think we've led the way in terms of providing support to that country. But as the conflict evolves, there are many scenarios that may play out. And can I ask what steps the department is taking to try and plan for future support that the Ukrainians may need?
So, Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State and I both speak to our counterparts in the Ukrainian MOD numerous times each week. And it's apparent, as I'm sure we would be in these circumstances, that the thing that starts every conversation is around resourcing the fight tomorrow. The great advantage of the partnership and the trust that the UK and Ukrainian MODs have is that we're able to do some of the thinking about what they might need next week, the week after, and in 3 months' time. And we're working very hard to make sure we're queuing up industry to deliver those capabilities as quickly as we can.
Patrick Grady.
The MOD's spending on that kind of relief in Ukraine will be counted as official development assistance?
I need to write to the honourable gentleman, but I'm not sure very much of it at all.
Steve Bryan.
Number 11, please, sir.
The MOD continues to deliver on its 25-year strategy to modernise its estate. In the last year, the Defence Estate Optimisation Portfolio has completed construction at 3 defence sites, with another 6 in construction, and completed the sale of 7 surplus MOD sites, generating £141 million in receipts to reinvest in modern and sustainable facilities for our armed forces.
Steve Bryan.
Mr knows that Sir John Moore Barracks in my constituency is marked for disposal under the programme. He also knows that what goes in its place is causing great anxiety. Now, as we reduce the size of the army in pursuit of the future soldier proposals of the IR, it's obvious that some consolidation will be needed around the training estate. But I want to know if the Minister shares my concern about losing what is a good facility and good order at the ATR in Winchester, given the conflict of the present, and I suspect for some time to come, looks very 20th century, not necessarily in terms of offensive ground operations, but in terms of all the other things, the boots on the ground, that we require of our armed forces.
I thank my honourable friend for the question, and I know from the meetings we've had he's very engaged in this MOD site, which is due to close in 2026. The rationale for closure is to concentrate all Phase 1 non-infantry training together at Purbright to provide a bespoke training environment embracing digitalisation. Numbers trained could be flexed. But I will continue to engage with my honourable friend on what he's impressed on me is an important issue for his constituents.
Question 14, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, Defence continues to play a central role in helping Ukraine defend its territorial integrity, working with allies and partners to uphold international law. We are also providing lethal and non-lethal military aid to meet Ukrainian armed forces' requests for assistance and coordinating the provision of additional military support from our allies and partners to enable Ukraine to repel Russian aggression.
Mr Speaker, the UK government's preparation for this war evidently anticipated a very quick lightning strike on Kyiv by Putin's forces, followed by attempted regime change, instead of military resource allocation for a protracted ground war crisis. Why was this the case, and what, if any, lessons have been learned?
Mr Speaker, I think there's probably 2 points to make to that. Firstly, the UK government was able to anticipate what has happened because our intelligence services did an extraordinary job in understanding what the threat was, and our alliances with other intelligence services around the world worked brilliantly. And I think that's a useful correction to 20 years of doubting intelligence when making decisions in this place, that actually our intelligence services remain amongst the best in the world. Now, to his particular question about whether or not the right or wrong kit was given, I think that absent any decision a decade ago to begin Ukraine's transition to NATO-calibre weapon systems, which would have in itself been a very overt step on the way to Ukrainian NATO membership, discuss whether or not that's a good thing. But the right thing to do in those circumstances was to grab stuff that was on the shelf, immediately available, and could be brought to bear immediately in the defence of Ukraine. And that's exactly what we did.
Question 15, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, Ukrainian armed forces have robustly resisted all Russian axes of invasion, conducting effective ambush and artillery strikes on Russian military convoys and maintaining air defences that are limiting Russian air superiority. Ukrainian resistance is significantly restricting Russia's ability to deploy combat power against Kyiv. It is unlikely that Russia has achieved its planned objectives at this stage of the invasion.
Andrew Jones.
My right honourable friend for that answer. The constituents in Harrogate and Esborough have told me they want to see the government continue to support the Ukrainian resistance in 3 ways. That's humanitarian in the region, welcoming refugees here, and of course military aid. We've seen the news that the Ukrainian army is retaking parts of their area from the Russians. So as the Ukrainian need evolves, will my right honourable friend ensure that our support evolves to meet that changing need?
Mr Speaker, I certainly can reassure my honourable friend that that is the case. We are looking, as I said in response to a question a few moments ago, a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months ahead in order to give the Ukrainian strategic depth to bring to bear our technological and industrial advantages in order to be able to provide them with the kit that we think they'll need, not just in the next few days, but actually in 3 months' time, so that they can continue to make sure that President Putin fails in his endeavours in Ukraine.
17, please, Mr. Speaker.
I would emphasise that decisions on equipment are in response to requests from Ukraine, and we consider how best to address their needs. The anti-tank weapons provided to Ukrainian armed forces thus far have been taken from existing UK stocks to ensure speed of delivery. The MOD continues to pursue options to rapidly meet Ukrainian requirements, including through UK industry and by actively convening our global partners.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have been contacted by manufacturers of military hardware in North Devon who work with the MOD and can rapidly move to provide items like helmets and body armour. Are there any plans to make an emergency streamlined procurement process to help speed this up?
I thank the Honourable Lady for a question. I would just emphasise that these are Ukrainian decisions, and I would urge UK companies to contact the Ukrainian embassy as well as other routes. However, in parallel, the Department for International Trade is meeting with defence-related trade associations such as ADS and Make UK on a weekly basis to rapidly consider industry offers for Ukraine and how they can be assisted, and UK manufacturers of military hardware may also therefore wish to forward their offers to their trade association.
Topical number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, as you're aware, but I've had a number of honourable members inquiring, so just that the Defence Secretary wouldn't want it to be thought that he'd meant a discourtesy to the House. He's had a brief brush with COVID. I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that on behalf of the Department, the Armed Forces and the Ministers here present, that it hasn't neither stopped him nor slowed him down over the last few days. He's had his second negative test today, and I'm assured that by this evening he'll be as present physically as he has been virtually over the last few days.
Alex Norris.
The Ministry of Defence continues to deliver against the objectives of the IR and Defence Command paper, which recognise that Russia remained the most acute threat to our security. We remain on course to deliver more modernised and threat-focused defence. We do so alongside our international allies, just as we've worked with them on Ukraine.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recent weeks have only reinforced the need to invest in our defence. This is important for our economy and vital for our security. With this in mind, why won't ministers give a clear commitment for British-built by default in defence procurement?
The events of the last few weeks show the absolute critical importance to having the right kit in the hands of our armed forces. On many occasions that can be met by British supply, but I would not write off the kit that we can procure from our US and NATO allies, and nor would I wish them to write off the prospect of buying kit from us. We are part of an alliance, and I'm absolutely convinced our approach of supporting British industry, supporting British investment, supporting through DCIS their capabilities, but also keeping a weather eye on what else is available to ensure our armed forces are well armed is the right approach.
By the Secretary of State for Defence to send lethal defensive military aid to Ukraine before Russia's invasion was inspired, and probably one of the very best decisions he's ever taken. What is the initial assessment by the Minister for the Armed Forces of the operational effectiveness in theatre of the next generation light anti-tank weapons that we've sent to Ukraine?
Mr. Speaker, one pauses because every time one of those weapon systems is effective, it kills the entire crew of an armoured vehicle. But the honourable gentleman will take no pleasure, but will be interested to note that they have been prolific in their success, and the Ukrainian armed forces value them enormously. They are accurate, they are reliable, they're deadly.
Secretary of State John Peeler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK's anti-tank and anti-air weapons are proving vital to the Ukrainians in fighting the Russian invasion, and at NATO last week the Prime Minister pledged that we would supply a further 6,000 missiles. Both NLAW and Starstreak are made in Britain by British workers, and as the Minister said in response to the member for North Devon on question 17, but has production yet started to replace British stockpiles of these missiles?
We are working closely with industry. There are some lines that have continued, but I'd rather not get into operational details of as and when stockpiles will be replenished. But suffice it to say, we are in active conversations with industry, as the right honourable gentleman would expect.
Rosendale.
Mr. Speaker, it's 40 years ago this coming week of the invasion of the Falkland Islands, when the violation of British sovereignty by Argentina. It's 5 weeks since the violation of sovereignty by Russia in Ukraine, and as China eyes up Taiwan, will the Minister agree with me that it's time the government started to plan for an increase in defence spending, maybe 3% of GDP?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hear what the honourable friend says. I note his concern. It's clearly something, as the IR made clear, we always look at this from a threat basis, and what is required we fund. But I would also remind him we are the biggest defence spender in Europe, the second biggest in NATO, and we were pleased to receive a £24 billion uplift in the current spending period.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member of Scottish Affairs, I had the pleasure of visiting Lossiemouth earlier this year, and Lookers Airfield in my constituency is still maintained as a backup site for operations. Given the current situation, can the Minister advise on sonar radar upgrades, because it's important that backup facilities are also fit for purpose?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I think I wrote to her last in November of last year on that issue. I'm afraid we haven't moved on yet. We're still studying exactly what radar configurations will be required. But it is actively being looked at, and I certainly commit to updating the Honourable Lady when I can give her an assurance one way or the other.
Julian.
Fleeing for their lives when Kabul fell, some Afghans with UK connections entered Pakistan without documentation. Will ministers urgently devise a practical plan safely to bring to the UK those Afghans who have entry visas to come to this country but who are still being hunted by the Pakistani police, whose government apparently wants to hand them back to the Taliban?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman knows that I've been engaged in this for him for some time, and I'm told from my phone that the High Commissioner has, I think, now reached out to explain the situation. But for the benefit of the wider House, there is a challenge where those who arrive in Pakistan with eligibility to come to the UK under whichever government scheme they are intending to come, but have not entered Pakistan legally, the Pakistan government is taking a view on limiting our abilities to process those people. We are working hard to persuade the Pakistan government to take a different approach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joram is a veteran and a constituent who came to Britain in 2001 and served in the armed forces with tours in Afghanistan and Iraq that left scars. He suffered from PTSD and took to drinking, and as a result served time in prison. But he turned his life around. He's now a painter and decorator and a father of 2. But the Home Office is seeking to deport Joram to Zimbabwe, where he has no connections, and when he was last there, more than 15 years ago, he was tortured for having served in our armed forces, and that risks happening again in the future. So will the Minister intervene to stop Joram, a veteran, from being deported?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would be very pleased to review the details of this case and correspond directly with her.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is vitally important that we protect our veterans from vexatious legal claims, something we've already put in place for those who've served overseas. Would the Minister agree to work with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and the Government to ensure legislation is also urgently brought forward to help protect our Northern Ireland veterans?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are grateful to all veterans of Op Banner, and we seek to give them closure with honour and finality, and I'm pleased that the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland will in due course bring forward the requisite bill.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. The most effective deployment of our submarine forces in response to Russian deployment is surely intelligence dependent. Now, the membership of the Joint Expeditionary Force is not synonymous with that of NATO. Can I press the Minister and say, are we making every effort to glean intelligence as to Russian naval deployment from these other countries?
Mr. Speaker, our intelligence of Russian submarine movements is, as on the right honourable gentleman imagines, some of the most sensitive, but he will be reassured to know that we are absolutely working with allies to make sure our understanding of where Russian submarines are is at the best it could possibly be, and that we are postured to make sure that we meet whatever threat there may be as a consequence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure my right honourable friend will agree with me that Poland's recent decision to award Babcock the contract for the Arrowhead frigates for the Polish Navy is a brilliant example of British shipbuilding capabilities being used to support our NATO allies.
I'm delighted to join my honourable friend in welcoming that down selection. There's still a process to go, but if they've finally got over the line, as I hope, that'll be great news for Babcock, great news for Scotland, and great news for British shipbuilding. I've been on multiple occasions to see them opposite number in Poland and to host them here in the UK. I think they're making a great choice.
Mr. Speaker, one of my constituents, a British and Afghan dual national, travelled to Afghanistan in June last year to visit his wife and 3 children aged under 10. During the evacuations, they were advised to proceed to the Baron Hotel, but were not processed before the suicide attacks. Since then, they've been trying to get to the UK, but the FCDO say they need a visa, and the Home Office say they're ineligible for the resettlement scheme. What urgent action can the Minister take with colleagues in the Home Office to ensure that my constituent can return safely to the UK with his young family?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady's question implies, I think, that her constituent was not eligible to come under the Ministry of Defence administered ARAP scheme. I know there will be no consolation to him nor his family in Afghanistan. We're working hard with other government departments to make sure that those who were called forward under the Leave Outside the Rules scheme that was in operation during Operation Pitting still are looked after, but is a discussion that I'll need to have with other ministers, and I'll ask one of them to write to her with an update on that case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that Starstreak anti-aircraft missiles are being made available to Ukraine. Can I ask my honourable friend, could this kit be used to protect humanitarian corridors and nuclear power plants?
Mr. Speaker, they certainly could be. They're a highly effective weapon system, but we are not seeking to be in any way prescriptive with the Ukrainians about how they are employed. They will understand their plan better than we do. We give them these weapon systems confident that they will bring them to good use, and thus far that's been proven to be correct.
Mr. Matheson.
Speaker, does the Minister share my concern that the agility and mobility hoped for in the Future Soldier programme will be thwarted if those soldiers are stuck in traffic on the M6 near Wheaton Barracks? Wouldn't it be much better to keep the Dale Barracks in Chester open and have a wider operational footprint for our future soldiers?
Very nicely done, Tristan.
It's an ingenious construction, Mr. Speaker, one which we always think about, but we don't have any plans to change that element of the DEO, I'm afraid, at this point.
Dr. Matthew Offord.
Ukraine is becoming one of the most contaminated countries in the world, with explosive weapons, landmines, cluster munitions and unexploded ordnance posing a threat to military and civilians alike. So will a minister meet with myself and leaders of the UK EOD and Mine Action community to discuss how we can plan for the enormous decontamination task ahead of us?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly will. I've had the I'm not sure it's misfortune or good fortune, but to visit a number of countries that have been heavily mined in the past, and you see the tragic human cost that comes from countries where they have been heavily mined, but also the hope that comes with a meaningful demining programme. I'll be delighted to meet with the organisations he suggests.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The National Security Vetting Services have never played such an important role, and the skill there is incredibly high. So when will the Minister announce that it will remain in York when they move forward with their plans for the infill barracks site?
I can't give any form of commitment on that right now, Mr. Speaker, but I will write to the Honourable Lady.
Dr. James Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the weekend, I was pleased to see 2 Royal Navy vessels join 5 other Joint Expeditionary Force nations in escorting British and Danish supply ships. They successfully delivered military vehicles and equipment to the UK-led NATO battle group in Estonia. Does my honourable friend agree that, as well as playing a vital role in NATO, it's important for the UK to continue to lead the Joint Expeditionary Force?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly do. NATO has been the absolute cornerstone of Euro-Atlantic security since the end of the Second World War. Long may it continue to do so. And the JEF, nor the EU, nor anything else should be seen as an alternative. But there is a market, I think, for complementary organisations like the GEF, which don't require consensus, and I think the GEF is showing absolutely its value in the way that it's being used at the moment.
Monaghan.
Speaker, the Veteran Strategy Action Plan includes a commitment to address the historic hurt or disadvantage that sections of the veteran community have experienced. Can the Minister confirm if this will include compensation for LGBT veterans?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to announcing further progress on this review in due course. And I don't want to preempt the terms and conditions of the Chair, but I think it will be reassuringly broad.
James Gray.
Thank you. While it is perfectly true that any sensible person in the West would rather President Putin were not the President of the Russian Republic, would the Minister not agree with me that it's vitally important that we should reiterate at every second that we can that NATO is a defensive alliance amongst 30 people, that if there's one boot that goes over the line onto NATO land, we will react, but in the meantime, the person of the presidency of Russia must be a matter for the Russian people and not for us?
My honourable friend is correct. NATO is a defensive alliance. We're working very closely together. As my honourable friend, the Minister of the Armed Forces, stated earlier on, we're undertaking measures to ensure that NATO retains that deterrence and that defensive posture which is appropriate in these times. But we are focused bilaterally on Ukraine and supporting Ukraine. That is the focus of our policy.
Andrew Gwynn.
At the last defence questions, I got what I hoped was an encouraging answer on behalf of the nuclear test veterans in what will be their 70th anniversary since the first nuclear tests. Can the Minister update us where we're at in terms of recognising these veterans and their families for their sacrifice?
Speaker, this continues to be under review, and I look forward to updating you in due course.
Ministers have already said that we've supplied 4,000 NLAWs and other equipment and deployments, that we're supplying 6,000 more. Meanwhile, Germany says that they will supply 1,000, and France hasn't actually stated what they're going to supply. And as far as I know, nothing has actually been supplied. So what advice do we give to our colleagues in Europe about how to actually get their equipment into Ukraine?
Mr. Speaker, it's not just advice. We offer a service whereby we will go to countries around Europe, pick up stuff, and make sure that it gets forward to Ukraine. And at the International Donor Coordination Centre in Stuttgart, which I had the pleasure of visiting last week, the UK 104 Brigade headquarters is the global lead on coordinating how all of that lethal and non-lethal aid arrives in countries that neighbour Ukraine and how it is moved on thereafter.
Thank you. Richard Holden.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker. With the next generation Challenger 3 turrets being built in the North East, supporting hundreds of jobs, the Defence Science and Technology Centre, working with Newcastle and other local universities, and Crook Defence Systems in my North West Durham constituency, providing the armoured vehicle tracks for not just British tanks, but also those of our allies across NATO and Europe. Will my right honourable friend continue to ensure that the North East firms and workers remain at the heart of British defence procurement?
They are, and I had a great day last Thursday opening the AI hub for DSTL in Newcastle and pressing the button to start the production of the turrets of our Challenger 3 tanks, which my honourable friend refers to. There's a great history of defence manufacturing in the North East, and it's going to have an even greater future.
Right, that's the end of defence questions. We now come to the urgent question. Can I call the Shadow Secretary of State, Louise Haigh?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Transport if he will make a statement on the conduct of P&O Ferries, Chief Executive and Board, and the action they will take to safeguard jobs.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the whole House has been left appalled and angered by the behaviour exhibited by P&O Ferries towards their workers over the last week. As a government, we will not stand by and allow hard-working, dedicated British staff to be treated in such a manner. This morning, my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, wrote to the Chief Executive of P&O asking him to pause and reconsider and offer his workers their jobs back on their previous terms, conditions and wages, should they want them. This is because we will return to this House to announce a package of measures that will ensure that the outcomes P&O Ferries are seeking to achieve through this disastrous move to pay less than the minimum wage cannot be seen through. As a result, they will have no reason left not to reconsider this move. As I said to the Select Committee last week, Mr. Speaker, as soon as this package of measures has been finalised, we intend to return to this House so that members can rightly scrutinise them. In the meantime, we are continuing to review the contracts that P&O Ferries with the Government, and the Insolvency Service are continuing to investigate the actions of Peter Hebblethwaite, who brazenly admitted to breaking the laws before two committees of this House last week. I am clear that P&O Ferries cannot and will not be allowed to get away with their actions. I hope the whole House will now support our efforts to do just this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that response. As he said, on Thursday, the Chief Executive of P&O Ferries made a mockery of the rule of law in this country. As a result, 7 of P&O's 8 ferries are now stuck in port, and on Saturday, the European Causeway was seized, the only passenger ship in Europe to be prevented from sailing over safety concerns. P&O Ferries must face the most serious consequences for their misconduct. I know the Minister and the Secretary of State feel the same way, and I appreciate the contact they have made with the opposition and trade unions. But every available tool at the government's disposal must now be used to force P&O Ferries to reinstate workers on the previous terms and conditions. So can the Minister provide some urgent clarity? Firstly, the Prime Minister said very clearly on Wednesday, we are taking legal action against the company concerned. So has the Secretary of State given his direction to prosecute? If not, why not? Second, given the Chief Executive has shown no respect for the law, will he seek his removal under the Directors' Disqualification Act and all those who unauthorised this unlawful action? Third, the Transport Secretary has said he will review contracts, but livelihoods are on the line now. So will he suspend all contracts and licences of P&O and DP World today? And why is DP World still listed as a member of the government's Trade Advisory Group? Finally, Mr. Speaker, time is running out. The deadline set by P&O for this Thursday for workers to agree severance amounts to extortion and has no legal basis. What powers does the government therefore have to extend that unlawful deadline? These workers, as he said, must be reinstated on the same terms as before. Many are paid above the minimum wage. So will the Minister commit to working with the unions and all ferry companies to agree a binding framework that would prevent a race to the bottom to the lowest international standards? I know the House agrees we must send a clear message that rogue employers cannot get away with trampling over the laws of this country. It's time to throw the book at P&O and save this loyal workforce.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. The Honourable Lady is quite right that P&O must face the consequences for their actions. We are looking at every tool that is available to the government. We're doing that as fast as is humanly possible. We're looking to bring forward a package of measures, which I apologise I can't go into in any more detail at the moment. Some of these are complicated matters we need to go through, but we will be speaking to members of the House, we will be speaking to the unions as we put this together. Secretary of State for Transport's made clear his views very clearly. I did, of course, when I came to the House when the announcement was made, as I did in front of the Transport Select Committee as well. The Secretary of State letter that he's written has been absolutely clear of what view we take of the actions that P&O have taken. And we will be acting upon that. There's a number of other matters. She's on the contracts. We continue to review any that may exist. We continue to can take any action we can on things like trade advisory groups. I hope she'll pardon me at the moment, simply because we will come forward with a package of measures that we'll take, as I said we would when I was in front of the Select Committee, and we're putting that together as we speak. And we will work, of course, with the unions and with all others as we put together this package.
Natalie Elfie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I may, I would like to thank my honourable friend and the Secretary of State for working so closely with me and with others since this disgraceful decision by P&O. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the minimum wage proposal is a floor and not a ceiling? It would put the ferry workers in the same position as other workers in this country. It defeats the P&O agency foreign workers model, so that they should just reinstate the Dover workforce on their current terms now. And does he agree with me that the government's measures coming forward this week will support ferry operators, ferry workers, and safeguard the Dover-Calais route for the future?
Mr. Speaker, may I first of all pay tribute to my honourable friend for her fearless championing of her constituents. There is no one who speaks out with more persuasion, with more force and more passion than she does for the people of Dover and her constituents. I pay tribute to her for that. She asks whether the national minimum wage is a floor, not a ceiling. I'm very keen to say there's a package we're considering, Mr. Speaker. We'll come to the House and explain what that package is in due course, and I hope the House will look forward and will welcome that when it comes.
SNP spokesperson Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I, through the Minister, thank the Secretary of State for what he said in the content of the letter he and his colleague at Bayes have sent to P&O today. These actions have been utterly reprehensible, but I do have to ask, where was this progressive zealot intent in protecting jobs when British Airways threatened to fire and rehire 30,000 staff? If some action had been taken at that point, we may not be in this position today with P&O. It is, however, better that a sin of repentance, Mr. Speaker, and the government is indeed on the right side of the road now, which I very much welcome, because the actions of P&O have appalled not just everyone in this House, but right across the country. He did say in his response to the Labour front bench he can't give any details now, but can I please reiterate that the deadline is on Thursday. This place breaks for recess on Thursday. This is of the most urgent nature, and we need details on that as soon as possible. And the chairs, just my final question, Mr. Speaker, the chairs of the Transport and Base Select committees have written to the Secretary of State today with a number of points, but stating the government should prosecute P&O ferries and remove its licence to operate in the UK. What consideration is he giving to this action, ensuring P&O cannot operate where it does not abide by the law?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I thank the right honourable gentleman for this question. I mean, he's quite right. In reality, this is something that unites the House. You know, whatever party, wherever we come from, whatever our politics, we're all disgusted by the way that P&O have behaved. And he's quite right. I'm very aware that the deadline is pressing. That's why the government's working so hard on this. As soon as we are able to do so, we aim to come back before the House and to update the House on the package of measures we're looking to take. That'll include all of them. Honourable Gentleman reminds me, he's reminded me on my feet a couple of questions I haven't answered, which I'll consider the point that he's raised around licences in particular. That's what, we can consider that as we're going along. I know there are some letters that are being written. I haven't yet seen those, but I'll be very keen to see the suggestions that are made in those as well. As I said when I was in front of the Transport Select Committee last week, very keen to work with the Select Committee and the unions with any constructive suggestions they've made. There have, Mr. Speaker, hope you'll pardon me just taking a second more say this, some very constructive suggestions from all sides of the House.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Stena is one of the largest employers in my constituency of Arnismore, and Holyhead is the second busiest ro-ro port in the UK. The news last week regarding P&O was felt with palpable anger and shock. I've spoken with Stena seafarers like David Watkin and Mark Harrison on the Stena Adventurer, who are quite rightly concerned about their jobs. Will the Minister confirm to my constituents that he and the Secretary of State are doing everything they can to ensure that this despicable, callous behaviour never occurs again?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady also speaks with enormous power and passion for her constituents in Arnismore. Can I pay tribute to her for that? The distress that has been felt by seafarers of all companies is absolutely palpable over the course of the last week. We clearly, of course, those at P&O are in our hearts and minds, but equally those who are worried about their livelihood from other operators. Precisely the point why we're taking the time that we are is because we want to be able to provide the reassurance to others, no matter where they work or who they're employed by, that their livelihoods will be secure.
Peter Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the Minister's comment in relation to DP World and P&O Ferries being on the advisory group, and he look at that as part of a package. Can he just tell us today, is part of that package going to take DP World off the government's advisory body? That would send a fantastic message right now to that company that their behaviour is unacceptable. Send that out. Will the Minister send that message out now? Not let's wait for the package.
Mr. Speaker, I do apologise to the honourable gentleman. I know that he would like me to say a number of things that concern that message. Now, the message will be sent. I hope he'll forgive me. I want there to be a package which we announce to the House so the House can scrutinise it, rather than announcing things piecemeal. So we will come to the House and we will explain what all those are.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for the strength of the government's response to the moral bankruptcy of P&O ferries, as demonstrated at the Select Committee last week. I welcome the government's commitments to protect seafarers in the future. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that every step needs to be taken to ensure that seafarers are properly protected into the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, moral bankruptcy is precisely the point. I think my honourable friend precisely puts his finger on it. We are taking every step. We will come forward with a package. We want to make sure that we get this right, and we are keen to make sure that people are protected.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that the unions met with P&O Ferries on Friday, and unsurprisingly perhaps, the company were treating those unions with utter and complete contempt. Now, I think the reason is this: the penny for P&O Ferries hasn't yet dropped. That legislation will come in to force very soon, which will remove that incentive to exploit foreign agency workers at the expense of British seafarers. So would the Minister pick up the phone to P&O Ferries today and ask the Chief Exec directly to extend the clock for accepting these, what are essentially illegal offers? It's not redundancy, it's illegal.
Yeah.
Can I first just start by thanking the honourable gentleman for his input. He's been extremely constructive and very grateful for the input he's put into this issue, which I'm taking very seriously, considering all of it. I hope you won't mind if I say that at the outset. Secretary of State's already done more than that. In fact, Secretary of State has written in no uncertain terms in public asking them to do precisely that. I'm not surprised that P&O have treated the unions, as he says, with contempt, because that's the way we've seen them behave across the whole of this matter. It is deeply regrettable, and I'd urge them to treat the unions and their workers with respect.
Steve McLaughlin.
Mr. Speaker, I come from a family of seafarers, and the behaviour of P&O has been arrogant, disgusting, unacceptable. I'm grateful to the Minister for the strong action himself and the Transport Secretary have taken. Will they send a strong message to the Chief Executive of P&O and say from the dispatch box he should resign for his behaviour?
Yes. Absolutely. The Secretary of State's been absolutely clear about that. He said so in terms. His position is untenable, and I agree.
John MacDonald.
Can I just raise again the fact that the shipping companies have received over £2 billion worth of tonnage tax concessions? P&O have been a major gainer from that tonnage tax. Could we have the assurance from the government today that no tonnage tax monies, tax relief is being paid now to P&O, and that, if necessary, we should seek to receive back some of the tonnage tax concessions that they gained, what for? As a result of a commitment to protect and increase the number of British seafaring jobs.
I can confirm to the honourable gentleman that we will be considering any actions we can take. We'll announce these as part of the package.
Peter Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful for what the Secretary of State has done and for the Minister. I just don't understand how a minimum wage, by definition is a minimum wage, cannot be paid to people. It just seems, and perhaps the Minister can explain that to me. But I take what the opposition have said. We really do need in this House to hear what the measures are. And I understand why the Minister wants to make a package. But could he ensure that we have an oral statement before Thursday and before we go into recess?
So the honourable gentleman is quite right, and I agree with him. The House does need to know what the measures are, and we intend to return to the House as soon as possible in order to make that statement.
Sammy Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, can I also welcome the messages on safety, on consultation and on wages that the government is sending out? But speaking to workers in my constituency who are affected in Larne, the clear thing they want to see is what sanctions are going to be placed on the company to make sure that they obey, because as we've seen in the evidence they gave last week, they still seem to think that breaking the law is okay.
Yeah, well, the honourable gentleman puts his finger on the centre of the issue, thinking that breaking laws is okay. It was an extraordinary display we saw last week when the GEO came here and brazenly admitted breaking the law and said he would do it again. We're going to make absolutely clear that's not acceptable. We'll announce later in the week how that will be, and I hope the honourable gentleman will pardon me if we delay until then.
Catherine Fletcher.
Speaking to people in South Ribble, it's frank to say that P&O's reputation is absolutely in tatters at the moment. Many of people saying they'll never use the company again. May I thank the Minister for the Secretary of State's strong letter this morning, calling for, and does he agree with me that the Chief Executive Officer of P&O Ferries should strongly consider his position?
I do.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just following up, actually, from that question, I just wondered, the Minister said there's going to be a package of measures that he'll be announcing later this week. But will one of those measures be the removal of the Chief Executive as a director under the company's Directors Disqualification Act 1986? Can you just say whether that is under active consideration?
Yeah. I know that a number of members will wish me to start talking about individual measures, and I hope the Honourable Lady will forgive me that I won't do that. We will come to the House and explain what that package of measures are. We're quite clear, however, about the position of that individual in question, that his position is untenable and he ought to go.
Ammon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Experienced crews are familiar with safety requirements. Could my honourable friend say and ensure the House that before any vessel leaves port, or any ferry leaves port now, a full safety inspection will take place before it leaves?
Yes, and indeed the MCA have detained one vessel to ensure that hasn't taken place. And the MCA, I have total confidence in them. They will ensure that any vessel is safe before it sails.
Carmichael.
To that question, Mr. Speaker, it surely has to be the case that the results of these inspections will be published in full so that the public can have confidence in what is being done. But as well as being in breach of their duty to inform the Secretary of State about their intentions, it appears that P&O are also in breach of their duty to inform flag states. Is that a matter which it is in Government's intention to pursue?
We're considering any options that may be relevant after the actions of P&O last week. We consider all and everything.
Laura Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the most damaging concessions that was made at the Select Committee last week was that it was cheaper for P&O to dispense with their Section 188 consultation obligations because it was more cost effective for them to pay 800 protective awards and then move on to agency worker rates of £5.50 an hour below the national minimum wage. The way they're doing this is by paying British national minimum wage up to the limit of British territorial waters and then moving on to rates of below £2 an hour. I know how hard my honourable friend is working on this issue, but we don't have this in the airline industry where they go between jurisdictions. So could he look very carefully at the territorial limit of the national minimum wage obligations?
I will indeed. It's one of the issues we are discussing. The honourable lady is quite right to draw attention to it, and I thank her for her expertise.
Bill Estes.
I was at the port of Liverpool on Saturday, and I met sacked P&O seafarers from both Liverpool and from Larne who'd come across using a different carrier to show their solidarity to their Liverpool comrades. And they told me that about the MCA inspection in Larne that's kept the vessel in port. But they said, I'll pass back to you their message. They want their jobs back. They want their jobs back on their existing terms and conditions. But they don't just want a review of the licences. They want proper action because they want the government to show that they really are on their side now and not to leave any doubt about whether they're on the side of billionaires from Dubai.
I can be absolutely clear now, we're on the side of the workers. We'll be explaining what we're going to do in the House later this week.
Mark Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate the Minister on the robust approach the government is taking to this matter. But, Mr. Speaker, many small business owners and managers work long and hard to get personnel matters right and to do the right thing and to comply with employment law. Would the Minister consider what signal it will send to them if P&O ferries get away with wilfully ignoring the law?
Well, that's a signal that we cannot have. We cannot have any company willfully ignoring the law. We want to make sure that every company knows it has to do the right thing and they must do the right thing.
Mick Whitley.
Speaker,
The government's response to the mass sackings of 800 P&O workers has been shameful in my view. Ministers failed to step in and save jobs. They refused to support Labour efforts to outlaw fire and rehire in October, and they're not seeking disqualification of P&O's chief executive from holding a company directorship for brazenly and knowingly breaking employment law. Now, many of my constituency employed in the maritime industry are afraid that their jobs could also be under threat. Will the Secretary of State urgently commit to bringing forward legislation that will guarantee the strongest employment protections are available to everybody working in the UK maritime industry, so that no one is ever treated as contemptible as the 800 P&O workers were?
Well, I don't agree with the honourable gentleman's way of describing the government's approach to this. I don't think we could have been any more robust. But the overall thrust of his point that workers should be protected, I agree with. We will come to the House and we will explain how we're going to do that as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Minister's statement, but two of my neighbours and constituents with a combined service period of 51 years were laid off by email last week and are understandably upset that they do not know where their money is coming into their household going forward. Can he assure me that the package of measures that he will be introducing, and I understand that he cannot go into detail, but can he make sure that at the heart of that package are workers' rights, and that in future no company like P&O will be able to take these actions going forward?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that's precisely what we aim to achieve.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. I was heartened when the Minister in opening said he will not stand by and allow workers to be treated in such a manner. But P&O's arbitrary and illegal deadline of 31st of March this Thursday for all SAC ratings to sign a severance package which effectively buys their jobs but also seeks to use a legal device to muzzle them, that's this Thursday. So when the Minister says he's going to bring a package to this House as soon as possible must be before Thursday.
The honourable gentleman's point, it's not on the way that these people have been treated. It's absolutely unacceptable. This is complicated, so there are a number of things we just have to go through to get this right. As soon as we can come back to the House, we will. But in the meantime, the letter that the Secretary of State has written, it makes precisely the demand that he asks.
Richard. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Secretary of State and the Department for the robust way in which they've really taken on P&O over the disgraceful actions over the last few weeks. But can I confirm a couple of things to me? Firstly, that all the contracts and relationships P&O have with the government are going to be under review. Can I secondly confirm they will block the outcome that P&O are after, which is specifically trying to pay workers less than the minimum wage? And thirdly, can he agree with me that the CEO should either resign or be sacked immediately?
So Honourable Member makes a number of excellent points there. We will consider those as part of the package, but I can assure him that the thrust he's seeking to achieve is the same as the government.
Dan Carlton. Mr. Speaker, the problem we have here is we've had fire and rehire with British Gas, we've had fire and rehire with British Airways, and I remember warm words from ministers just a few months ago, but no changes to the outcome. And the words of my fellow Liverpudlian Frank Cottrell Boyce, that Tory MPs protesting the behaviour of P&O bosses is like your neighbourhood arsonist offering you a flask of tea over the smoking ruins of your house comes to mind. I wonder if ministers now will look at whether they could commit to securing a collectively bargained fair pay agreement for the entire sector.
We'll be considering all of the suggestions that have been made by honourable members across the House, and I thank them for it, and will announce in due course to the House the measures we propose to take.
Alan Dorrans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, what discussions has the Minister had with the Scottish and other devolved governments to discuss the impact of the P&O's actions, and what efforts has he made with Cabinet colleagues to end the utterly despicable practice of fire and rehire?
So at a time like this, Mr. Speaker, conversations take place across government and across the devolved administrations as well to consider what action we can take together.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement today. I hope he brings forward legislation very quickly. In that legislation, will he also take on board the scandal of the way in which seafarers are treated in international waters generally? Low wages, poor conditions, terrible working arrangements that they suffer, which has been exposed by this scandal of P&O. We need to address this issue of fairness and justice for all seafarers, and as a major seafaring nation, we can take the lead on that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the country absolutely is a major seafaring nation and has taken the lead already. For example, during the pandemic, where we were the first country to declare the seafarers as key workers, where we took the issue of their rights to the International Maritime Organization. So I am very keen that we continue to take the lead in that, and he puts his finger on a number of really pertinent issues.
Hello, Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before entering Parliament, I was an employment rights lawyer for more than a decade, and in all that time, I don't think I've ever seen such a blatant disregard of the law and contempt for workers' rights. This government says it's wrong, but the reality is it's been allowed to happen under their watch. They've failed to ban fire and rehire, failed to extend national minimum wage to seafarers. If it wasn't from the legal challenge from Unison, we'd still have fees for the Employment Tribunal. No wonder employers think they can get away with it. When is this government finally going to stand up for workers' rights?
Yeah, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is just wrong in a number of points she makes. I mean, for example, in 2020, the national minimum wage was extended to the vast majority of seafarers working on the UK continental shelf. She's just wrong about that. It's the regulation from 2020. There is an issue here that we are seeking to address, and we are addressing it.
Where are you gone?
After admitting to the Select Committee that he had broken the law and would do so again, the nation has concluded that Peter Hebblethwaite is not a fit and proper person to be a director, not just of P&O, but of any company. When will the government also reach that conclusion and disqualify him? And when will they seek to ensure that workers onshore are not treated with the same contempt that these seafaring workers have been treated with, and make sure that people cannot be fired in this way, whether they're working for Weetabix, Tesco's, Sainsbury's, British Airways, British Gas, or any of the other companies that have been doing this over the past 2 years.
So the government has reached the same conclusion as the honourable gentleman with regards to Mr Hebblethwaite, which is why the Secretary of State's written to him in the terms that he has today. It's a matter for a court to disqualify a person, not for the government, which would be an unusual position for any government, I think, to take, as I know he'll understand. We're looking to see what else we can do to protect workers in this sphere, as I've explained. I look forward to updating the House before the end of the week.
Vital Fabricant.
Can I thank my honourable friend for taking such a robust stance on this issue? But could I invite him, because there is some concern that he makes it absolutely clear that the despicable action of P&O Ferries is not connected in any way with P&O Cruises, which is a completely separate company owned by a separate organisation, because they are concerned that they may lose bookings as a consequence.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. There is no connection between P&O Ferries and P&O Cruises whatsoever. They are wholly separate organisations, separately managed. No blame whatsoever for the actions of P&O Ferries attaches, or should be seen to attach, to P&O Cruises.
Yeah. Clive Afford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chief Executive of P&O came into this place where the laws of the land are made and told us that he broke those laws, and it did so in a premeditated way. Then compounds the situation by going on to then to show scant regard for safety measures on his ships, resulting in them being impounded. So, knowing all that, doesn't the Minister think that the Chief Executive deserves to be summarily dismissed? And shouldn't he be making sure that that's done immediately, regardless of any package that he's going to bring forward? Yeah.
I share the honourable gentleman's state of shock at the statement that was made by Mr Hebblethwaite in front of the Select Committee last week. I share that entirely. The Secretary of State and I also share the view that his position is untenable, and said that to him that he ought to go, and I'd urge him to take that very seriously on board.
Christian Mathers.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My honourable friend from Hull East is absolutely right. These aren't redundancies because the positions aren't redundant. They still need crew to man those ships. But the fact remains that it is still cheaper and quicker and easier to sack British workers as opposed to workers anywhere else in Europe. So when he brings forward this package, will he also have a discussion with the rest of the government to say that the time has come for proper employment rights in the UK?
So I take on board entirely the point the honourable gentleman makes. The most important thing that we have to do now is to make sure that these workers are seeing their rights protected and others in a similar position as to them. And any lessons that we have to draw in the wider sphere, government will be taking note at all times, but it would clearly be precipitate for me to make any commitment as what that might be at this time.
John Cryer.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister's been given example after example after example of fire and rehire this afternoon. Every member of this House, unless they've been living on another planet, is acutely aware of all those examples in the last 2 or 3 years. At what point is the government actually going to say, this is wrong, it should be illegal?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this isn't, as the honourable gentleman knows, really a fire and rehire situation. But we are absolutely clear that the way these workers have been treated is wrong, which is why I've said in no uncertain terms we're bringing forward a package of measures, and I will be able to update the House before the end of the week.
Kate Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm if the Government has received advice from the Insolvency Service? And if so, can he confirm that P&O, simply by not notifying the flag states of these intended redundancies within the prescribed time limits, means that they would have committed an offence which could and should lead to an unlimited fine being imposed? And if not, will the Minister bring forward legislation to correct the position retrospectively and make that unlimited fine happen?
Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't be normal for any minister to comment on legal advice that's given, but I share the honourable lady's concerns, which is quite why we've asked the Insolvency Service to investigate in these circumstances. And of course, I take on board the suggestion that she makes, as I do from all honourable members, and we will update the House on what that package will be shortly.
Richard Bogan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dockers in Rotterdam refused to load freight onto a ferry in support of 800 unlawfully, illegally sacked P&O workers. Does the Minister support that action in support of saving those 800 jobs? And if so, why is it good enough for workers and trade unions in Rotterdam, but it's still illegal in this country to take solidarity action?
Mr. Speaker, this is a government that is standing up for workers. We have been absolutely clear about our condemnation of the way that P&O workers have been treated in this case, and we will be taking action, which I will explain in due course.
Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the P&O pension pot has a shortfall of 147 million. P&O's parent company, DP World, has previously sponsored a golf tournament to the tune of £150 million. So does the Minister agree with me that P&O's parent company should step in and pay up so that workers' pensions are secure for the future? Will he add this to his package that needs sorting out, please?
I entirely understand the honourable gentleman's concern. I think that DP World and P&O should get together, talk to their workers and look after them, which they haven't done so far.
Sir Tony Boyd.
The Minister's response then is an interesting one. DP World are, of course, the parent company and have corporate responsibility for the actions of P&O ferries. Has anybody picked up the phone to the government of the UAE, who have responsibility for DP World, and said that this is simply not good enough and not good for their reputation?
We've been absolutely clear when we've written to P&O that the decisions that they've taken are absolutely catastrophic for their reputation. And we say the same things to DP World.
The Minister's absolutely right. This isn't fire and rehire because the P&O workers haven't even been given the indignity of being offered back their contracts on lesser terms and conditions. But the flippant disregard for the UK workforce, the contempt for the rule of law, and the disgusting abuse of foreign workers in what can only be described as slave labour isn't just wrong, it's not on. So I hope very much when the Minister comes back to the House with his detailed package, we won't just be tough on words, we will be tough on actions and tough on P&O.
So I agree with the honourable member that the way that his workers have been treated is absolutely not on. We've been absolutely clear about that, and we are keen not on words, but on action.
Rachel Mask.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is worse is that DP World and P&O ferries were prepared to put crew untrained onto these ships and also passengers onto these ships and for them to sail, completely against health and safety measures. Therefore, there is something at the core of this company's culture which needs to be addressed, which must result in the licence being removed, because clearly it is prepared to be unsafe and break the law.
So I understand the honourable lady's concern. The thing that I hope will give her confidence is that we have the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, in whom I have full confidence they are an outstanding safety regulator. They inspect all of these ships, and if they aren't safe to sail, they won't sail.
That finishes the UQ. We are now going to come to the next statement, and the statement will be from the Secretary of State for Education, the Right Honourable Nadeem Zahawi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will now make a statement on the publication of the school's white paper. Since 2010, we have been on a mission, Mr. Speaker, to give every single child a great education. We have made huge strides, but we know that there is still further to go on that journey. Journey that my predecessors began, and I'm proud to lead today. Too many children, Mr. Speaker, still do not get the start in life that will enable them to go on and make the best use of their talents and abilities. Sadly, disadvantaged pupils, or those who have special educational needs, are less likely to achieve the standards we expect for them. Since 2010, we have been rolling out many changes to our education system, changes that have driven up standards and have lifted us up the league tables internationally, and have given us measurable evidence of what works. We will now put that evidence to use and scale up what we know will create a high-quality system for children, parents and teachers. We have an ambition that by 2030, we will expect 90% of primary school children to achieve the agreed standard in reading, writing and maths. In secondary schools, I want to see the national GCSE average grade in both English language and maths increase from 4.5 in 2019 to 5. By boosting the average grade, it shows a real determination to see all children, whatever their level of attainment, do better. A child who goes from a grade 2 to a grade 3, or a child that goes from grade 8 to grade 9, contributes to this ambition as much as a child on the borderline who may go up from grade 4 to 5. So every parent can rest assured that their child is going to get the attention they deserve, however well they are doing. It goes without saying that every child needs an excellent teacher, Mr. Speaker. This white paper continues our reforms to training and professional development to give every child a world-class teacher. The quality of teaching is the single most important factor within a school for improving outcomes for children, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Our vision is an excellent teacher for every child in our country. But if we are to do this, Mr. Speaker, we need to make teaching even more of an attractive profession. To make sure it is, we will deliver 500,000 teacher training and development opportunities by 2024, giving all teachers and school leaders access to world-class, evidence-based training and professional development at every stage of their career. We will also make a £180 million investment in the early years workforce. Teacher starting salaries are set to rise to £30,000, as we promised in our manifesto, and there will be extra incentives to work in schools with the most need. World-class education also needs environments in which great teaching can have maximum impact, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, we will improve standards across curriculum, behaviour and attendance, making sure that all children are in school and ready to learn in calm and safe, supportive classes is my priority. All children will be taught a broad, ambitious, knowledge-rich curriculum and have access to high-quality experiences. We will set up a new national curriculum body to support teachers, founded on the success of the Oak National Academy. This body will work with groups across the sector to identify best practice, deepen expertise in curriculum design, and develop a set of optional resources for teachers that can be used either online or in the classroom. These resources will be available across the United Kingdom, levelling up education across our great country. We will continue to support leaders and teachers to create a classroom where all children can learn in a way that recognises individual needs and abilities. In addition, we are going to boost our ability to gather and share data on behaviour and attendance. We will move forward with a national behaviour survey to form an accurate picture of what really goes on in school and classrooms, and of course, to modernise our systems to monitor attendance. We will introduce a minimum expectation for the length of the school week to the national average of 32.5 hours for all mainstream state-funded schools from September 2023 at the latest. Thousands of schools already deliver this, Mr. Speaker, but there are a number that don't, and that needs to change. Too many children, Mr. Speaker, especially those who are most vulnerable, routinely fall behind and never catch up with their peers. The awful COVID pandemic has, of course, made this worse, and even though I am relieved to tell you that the latest research on learning loss, Mr. Speaker, and recovery shows pupils continue to make progress, but there is still much more to do. That is why today's white paper sets out our ambitions, a really ambitious plan for scaling up that recovery, building on nearly £5 billion recovery funding already announced. I know that my children, Mr. Speaker, are the most important thing in the world to me, and I'm not alone in saying this. All parents want their children to be happy and to grow up to a future that is full of promise. So I'm today making a pledge to parents. It is a pledge from me and from this government via schools to all families. The parent pledge is that any child that falls behind in English or maths will receive timely support to enable them to reach their potential. A child's school will let parents know how their child is doing and how the school is supporting them to catch up. Tutoring has been a great success, and it's that tutoring that is making a difference. It is here to stay, and we want to for it to become mainstream, Mr. Speaker, and a fundamental pillar of every school's approach to delivering the parent pledge. There will be up to 6 million tutoring packages by 2024. We know the approaches I have outlined make a huge difference to pupils. So I've asked myself, we have 22,000 schools in England. How do we ensure that these happen systematically in every school for every child? How do we get that consistency across the system? And it's become clear from my 6 months in the department, studying the evidence, that well-managed, tightly managed families of schools are those that can consistently deliver a high-quality and inclusive education. It is one where expertise is shared for the benefit of all, and where resources and support can help more teachers and leaders deliver better outcomes for children. With this in mind, by 2030, we intend for every child to benefit from being taught in a family of schools, with their school in a strong, and I underline strong, multi-academy trust, or with plans to join or form one. This move towards a fully trust-led system with a single regulatory approach will drive up standards. We want also to encourage local authorities, if they think they do well in running their schools, to establish their own strong trusts, and we will back them. There will be a clear role for every part of the school system, with local authorities given the power they need to support children. We will set up a new collaborative standard requiring trust to work constructively with other partners. I know from my experience both in business and in rolling out the COVID vaccine that the hardest thing for any complex system, whether it's health or education, is scaling up. But I have faith I have faith in the brilliant leaderships that we already have in our school systems, in our educationalists, to be able to deliver on this white paper. We want to spread brilliance throughout our country, levelling up opportunity and creating a school system where there's a clear role for every part of the system, all working together and all focused on one thing, and that is delivering outstanding outcomes for our children. Soon, everyone will see what we all know, that this Conservative government is busy making our schools the very best in the world. We should be so proud of how far we have come and rightly hopeful about where we are going next. And for that reason, I commend the statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State, Bridget Phillipson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I first thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for advance sight of his statement today. It is little over 2 years since schools were closed to most pupils. It is almost 12 years since his party came to power. And yet, amongst the many re-announcements we heard over the weekend, the big ideas were that 3/4 of our schools should carry on as normal, teaching the hours they already do, that when children are falling behind, schools will be there to help, and that the National Tutoring Programme, described by providers as at risk of catastrophic failure, is the answer to all of our problems. Is that really it? Is that the limit of his ambition for our children and for our country? He rightly stresses the need to be evidence-led. Is that all he thinks the evidence supports?
Order. In fairness, I expect the Secretary of State, which he was held with good order. I certainly want the same good order for the Shadow Secretary of State. If somebody doesn't want to keep good order, please leave now. Secretary of State.
The Secretary of State rightly stresses the need to be evidence-led. Is that all he thinks the evidence supports, or is that all he could persuade the Chancellor to support? Mr. Speaker, the attainment gap is widening. Performance at GCSE for our most disadvantaged children was going into reverse even before the pandemic. And after 2 years of ongoing disruption, it's clear enough where the focus should be. The Secretary of State says he has ambitions, but they are hollow. Hollow because they are wholly disconnected from any means of achieving them. Hollow because there is no plan to deliver them, but also hollow because there is no vision here about what education is for, what growing up in our country should involve, and what priority we should give our children. We are 2 years into the pandemic. 2 years is a long time and an important time. Half a lifetime for children starting school in September. Years of disruption, of botched exams, isolation, time spent at home. We can all see the impact that this has had on our children. Yet time and again, the government fails to grasp the truth that time out of education for children and young people means more than time out in the rest of their lives. Instead, our children have been an afterthought for this government. A government that showed its priorities when they reopened pubs before they reopened schools. A Prime Minister whose own advisor on education recovery resigned in despair. A department that closed schools to most children with little thought of how it would recover the damage or reopen them safely. Labour listened to parents and young people and set out the children's recovery plan our children need and our country deserves. Breakfast clubs and new activities, quality mental health support in every school, small group tutoring for all who need it. Our children have waited long enough. When will they see a recovery plan that rises to the generational challenge staring us all in the face? Only today his department published research setting out that in reading in particular, pupils are falling further behind and the disadvantage gap is widening. But, Mr. Speaker, this is deeper than just the last 2 years. On these benches, we see the value and worth of every child. We see them as ambitious and optimistic, with dreams for their futures. We see the role of government in matching, not tempering that ambition. Education is about opportunity, and we want opportunity for every child in every corner of our country at every stage. We want childcare that is high quality, affordable and available, not a cost that prices people out of parenting. We want every parent to be able to send their child to a great local state school, which is why we would be launching the most ambitious school improvement plan for a generation, focusing on what happens inside the school, not the name above the door. We want to see teachers supported to succeed, not leaving the profession as they are, which is why we have set out plans for career development and thousands of new teachers, because the success and professionalism of our teachers enables the success of our children. We want to see our children not just achieve, but thrive at school, with a rich and broad curriculum that enables them to flourish. We want to give children and young people real choices and see them succeed through strong colleges and apprenticeships. That's why we would deliver work experience, careers advice and digital skills for all of our young people, so everyone leaves education ready for work and ready for life. That's why today's white paper represents such a missed opportunity. But for all the disappointment we feel on these benches, echoed by school staff and school leaders across the country today, and although the Secretary of State in his heart probably feels that disappointment himself, it is our children, whose voices are rarely heard in this place, who are the real losers today.
Secretary of State. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was hoping for a plan, but there was none forthcoming. She spoke about schools being closed. Labour, dancing to the tune of their union paymasters, wanted the state to keep them closed. If the lady, the honourable lady, thinks that's a plan, then maybe she should go and visit one of these schools, as I did with the honourable member in Newham earlier on today. If she had been with me at the Monega School with the brilliant leadership of Liz Harris there and her team, she will know that actually our reforms are working. That family of trusts of schools in a high-performing multi-academy trust is what is delivering for those children, 24% of whom are on pupil premium. Great leadership, great teachers being supported by a fantastic teaching hub within the group that is part of their trust, delivering great outcomes for children rather than playing politics with our education system. I seem to recall that it was her leader who wanted, I think, schools to remain closed and, of course, wanted to pause the whole of the vaccination campaign so that we would lose 3 months before we vaccinate teachers. Of course, by not doing that, by many of his backbenchers going against him, we continued vaccinating, we protected teachers, and we got schools back open. She speaks about our standing in the world rankings. Well, I can share with her that England achieved its highest ever scores in international comparison studies in both reading and maths in the 2016 Pearls and the 2019 TIMSS international tables. That is what this government delivers. It is the introduction of the phonics screening check in 2012 that has delivered. The percentage of Year 1 pupils meeting the expected standards has risen from 58% to 82%. That is what this government is proud, a record of real delivery for young people in this country, with 91% achieving this standard by Year 2 in 2019. Of course, we've had a pandemic since then, and that 5 billion into recovery is making the real difference. Again, she questions the recovery and what the National Tutoring Programme is doing, which we have just announced has delivered a million tutoring blocks of tutoring. That is 15 hours for those children. It will meet its targets because school leaders told us that they wanted a school-led pillar as well as the other 2 pillars that are also delivering, and we have delivered that for them. And the evidence that we published today that she spoke about, that since the spring of 2021, of last year, the evidence suggests that primary pupils have recovered around 2/3 of progress lost due to the pandemic in reading and around half of progress lost in maths. That is real delivery, Mr. Speaker. Yeah.
Chair of the Select Committee, Robert Halford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I actually welcome this white paper. I think there are the beginnings of a long-term plan for education, especially with the special needs review coming out tomorrow and the care review. And I think that actually what you've done is began to put a washing line for all those clothes pegs of different educational initiatives. I think the parent pledge and the catch-up plan is also really important. Can I just ask, the white paper talks about a knowledge-rich curriculum. Absolutely in favour of that, but what about a skills-rich curriculum alongside? And I see the skills minister watching carefully, one which would prioritise skills like oracy, financial education, technical and vocational education, reverse the huge decline in design and technology and better prepare students for the world of work. And what does the white paper do for those children from care backgrounds, from excluded backgrounds, from special needs backgrounds who way underperform compared to their peers in terms of GCSEs? And we know the grim statistics. How will this white paper help them? How will the curriculum better prepare pupils for the world of work, as I mentioned? And what is he doing? Perhaps one of the most important priorities is to return the 124,000 Oliver Twist ghost children, possibly on our streets, back to school, who've not returned to school for the most part since the schools reopened last year.
I'm grateful for the Chair of the Education Select Committee. I think he raises a number of really important questions. And he's absolutely right to identify that the Schools White Paper with the SEND Green Paper, which we'll consult on, that we will publish tomorrow and share with the House, and the Children's Social Care Review by Josh McAllister, really gives us for the first time the ability to knit together a system that delivers for all pupils, especially those with SEND and those that are most vulnerable in the care system. On things like financial education, my honourable friend, the schools minister, is looking at how we can take that further and embed that in the education system. But of course, he will also know that I walk around the country wearing on my lapel the TL, the technical level badge, because that is a fusion between the great work we've done on apprenticeships with A-levels. That is what we will do in terms of making sure children have those runways that their career paths can take off on. And of course, he's right to remind us of the 124,000 children who are out of education, which is why, for the first time in our country, we will have a register to make sure we know exactly where those children are. There are many parents who deliver great home education, some of them in my own constituency that I've seen, but actually many children are lost in the system. We have to make sure we know where they are.
I'm just going to say to the House, this has to finish by 5:15, so please help each other being short and sweet in questions as well as answers. Kate Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's good that the Secretary of State has clearly been listening to the concerns of the profession, of parents and of young people since he came into post. But the announcements he's made today are, I'm afraid, underpowered because of the funding pressures that will continue in the system. Schools continue to face COVID costs, they continue to face rising salary costs, which are not being fully funded by the department, including, for example, the increased starting salary for new teachers, still on the horizon rather than delivered. They face rising energy costs, all the other pressures that organisations are facing, and particularly he will know that there is a particular funding pressure in relation to pupils with SEND. What is he doing to ensure that schools have the funds they need to rise to the ambitions he's set out today?
I'm grateful for the Honourable Lady's question. She's right to say there are many pressures on schools at the moment. The funding we secured at the spending review was £7 billion, much of it front-loaded to this year and next year, £4 billion of that. Energy costs are rising. They're 1.4% of a school's budget. The big part of the budget is obviously the wages. But we're keeping an eye on what is happening to energy costs in schools. On SEND, we've put an additional 1 billion in, so the total budget now stands at 9.1 billion, plus an additional 2.6 billion to make sure we deliver the specialist provision that we need in the system, which has led to some of the sort of lack of confidence from parents as to whether their child will get the right provision. And today's white paper actually supports mainstream schools to all be great SEND schools as well.
Sir John Redwood.
How will the poorly performing schools get the brilliant teachers and the better professional development which he rightly wants, because that is what they need?
I'm grateful for my honourable friend's question. He's absolutely right. So we endowed the Educational Endowment Foundation when we came into office in the coalition government, and of course I've just announced that a further endowment for the next 10 years. They have evidenced what the qualifications and the quality of teacher training that is required, whether it's in the early careers framework, the initial teacher training, or later in life in professional development. And we are following that evidence, and we're scaling up 500,000 teacher training opportunities. Never been attempted, certainly in my time in Parliament. It's a huge scale up of teacher training, and that's what we will deliver.
Karen Smith.
Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, confronted on the Ridge programme, the Secretary of State could not answer the question about the shocking fall in per-pupil funding, particularly compared to private schools. My child and thousands of children started their school just before this government came into power, and they are just about to finish. He talks about a parent pledge. Will he apologise to the thousands of parents and young people for the last 12 years of this government and what they have done to that per-pupil funding for our children?
Hear, hear, hear.
I'm slightly puzzled by the Honourable Lady's question because, as I've just described earlier, that the standards have been consistently going up because we've introduced things like the phonics screening check, the investment that we are making in education, 7 billion, front-loaded 4 billion for this year and next year, will make sure that schools have the funding they need. I had the OECD in my office, Andrea Schleicher, and tell me that actually we are in the top quartile in terms of investment in school system in the United Kingdom. That is what this government is doing. This white paper takes the evidence of what works and scales it for every child in this country, because I want to see every child have that opportunity that I had to be able to achieve to the greatest, the best of my talent.
Sir Desmond Swain.
But teacher training has often been part of the problem. By what mechanism will he prevent any return to half-baked theories that prove to be a disaster in the classroom?
Evidence-led, and we're also launching the Institute for Teaching will deliver those high standards that my honourable friend quite rightly focuses on.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Cumbria, we have some of the best schools in the country, but also some of the smallest. And they're small because the communities that they serve are often half empty because the homes are not lived in because they're owned by second homeowners. Would he agree with me that it's right to tax second homeowners at least twice the council tax and use that funding to make sure that rural community schools have the support they need to do the job that they're so good at?
I'm grateful for my friend's question. We are supporting the small rural school through the national funding formula to make sure that they have the funds that they need.
Lord Trott.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the white paper and particularly ambitions around literacy and numeracy. Can I ask that Ofsted reinforce these ambitions? Are they intervene in a data-led way where they're not being met?
I'm grateful to my friend's question. Ofsted's framework in 2019 actually has in many ways helped schools to focus on literacy and numeracy, but also to have that knowledge-rich curriculum. And this white paper doesn't actually deviate from that. It's that working in lockstep with our colleagues in Ofsted to make sure that we deliver the highest quality outcomes for children. If you focus on outcomes, you won't get this wrong.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not convinced that the government is listening. The government does not have the support from the National Association of Head Teachers, Association of School and College Heads, National Education Union for this white paper. If he is really listening, what head teachers tell me is that they need classroom support teachers that have so drastically been cut over the years by this Tory government.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I would just remind her that teaching assistants are now at 217,000 teaching assistants in the classrooms, a 6,000 increase since 2010. I speak to ASCL and the other unions and share the evidence and share our work in the White Paper, and they've certainly been engaging with us. The Educational Endowment Foundation that does the evidence that I just spoke about in other areas also have a really excellent review at how best to use teaching assistants, and I think every school should look at that review.
Steve Bryan.
On Friday I had the latest session with Hampshire County Council, and we go through every school in my constituency, and the Secretary of State will be pleased to know that every single one is good or outstanding, and the last one will be there very soon. But I'm concerned about access to CAM services. If children are not in the right place mentally, they can't learn educationally. But I'm also concerned about small rural primaries. And I think the heads in my constituency of those schools will take some convincing that being part of a larger multi-academy trust is the answer to their problems. So, given what it says in the White Paper about all children being in academies, can the Secretary of State convince me why the evidence says that is the answer?
I'm grateful for my honourable friend. He has a number of questions. I'll try and unpack them. We'll be saying more on, obviously, our work with the Department of Health in the Send Green Paper tomorrow. Suffice to say that actually, again, local evidence and a dashboard and that transparency will lead to much better outcomes for families and for children. On rural primaries, he's absolutely right to say that I have similar high-performing rural primaries, and my message to them is they do an excellent job. If they feel like they want to get together with other rural primaries, then we will support them in setting up a multi-academy trust. Or, of course, where local authorities think they do a great job in supporting their schools, they can set up a trust. So what I'm trying to do with the White Paper is make sure we take everyone with us on this journey, because ultimately, if we all remember why we are in this for, and that is to deliver better outcomes for every child in the place, at the right place, the right time for every child, then we would do the right thing.
I just need to reiterate that we need one question so that the Secretary of State doesn't have to answer a number, and the questions do need to be brief, not with long statements beforehand. Barry Shearman will lead the way in how to do that.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you for those kind words. The Secretary of State knows I admired him in the past as a manager and a man with passion. But this isn't much of a plan, and any plan needs people to lead and deliver it. And we now have weak local authorities, we have a weak central government education department, we have a weak Ofsted, and if he really believes the leadership's going to come just from Academy Trust, I don't think we're going to achieve very much.
I think what this White Paper will do will define what the role of each of those stakeholders that he just described is in the system. That clarity, and then the support for good leaders in local government, good leaders of multi-academy trust, good leadership. I would just push back slightly with respect. We have great leadership in Ofsted as well. We will deliver for those children that we all wanted to see, as I know he does deliver for.
Mrs. Maria Miller.
Can I welcome the White Paper and the real focus of my right honourable friend on excellence in our schools. But we can only deliver world-class numeracy and literacy if schools are safe places to learn. And the government's own inquiry last year pointed out that every school should assume their students experience sexual harassment and online abuse at school. So will my right honourable friend include as central to his plans the culture in our schools and the rollout of relationship and sex education?
She's absolutely right to highlight this issue. I was in the department when we rolled out the relationship education in the curriculum, and of course relationship and sex education in the curriculum, teaching young people what healthy relationships are like, and of course identifying, knowing unhealthy, abusive behaviour as well. It's a priority for me. It's in the White Paper under paragraph 80 as well.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State spoke about levelling up opportunity, and in some of the most disadvantaged areas, and I include my own constituency in that, we have the excellent Hull and East Yorkshire Children's University, which provides a rich source of experiences and support for pupils and schools. And I wondered if the Secretary of State could say something about his plans to harness the expertise of organisations like children's universities to give them sustainable funding so they can really get to work with that levelling up agenda that the government talks so much about.
Hear, hear.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. That's exactly what this white paper will do. That's why the Institute of Teaching is so important to our plan. I'll certainly have a look at the Children's University she mentions as well. Anyone who wants to join us on this journey is most welcome, and we want everyone to come along, because ultimately, if we deliver for every child, we've done something really great for the future of our country.
Jonathan Gullis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend's white paper and thank him for the fact that Stoke-on-Trent is now an education investment area priority, which comes with additional investment for our local area, and also the fact that the levelling up premium to recruit and retain some of the best teachers across the country has been adopted from the Onward New Schools Network report that I did about levelling up education. But most importantly, we want some of the best multi-academy trusts who are too long clustered normally in the south to come up to Stoke-on-Trent. How does this white paper enable that to happen?
I'm grateful for my honourable friend. He's always been a great champion for his schools and actually speaks with real experience as an accomplished teacher in his own right. He's absolutely right to say we need our best high-performing multi-academy trusts to lift their ambitions. This white paper will deliver that, including, of course, additional funding of 80 million to make sure we get that momentum going again. We're about to announce our 10,000th academy. We've got 22,000 schools in England. I am ambitious for every part of the country, and we will deliver that in Stoke-on-Trent as well as other parts of the country as well.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the Secretary of State on his choice of Monaga Primary School for his speech this morning. Will he... some multi-academy trusts, though, are a bureaucratic mess at the moment. I welcome his proposal to allow local authorities to set up and lead trusts. Will he... does he have plans, as has been reported also, to allow schools to exit from MATs that don't suit them and to increase the accountability of trusts to local authorities?
Yes, we do, Madam Deputy Speaker. The white paper speaks to this. We will consult on the regulatory framework around trusts, and the best performing trusts have the confidence to join us and make sure that we get that framework right.
Stephen Hammond.
Deputy Speaker, 15% of children have special educational needs. Could my right honourable friend set out how he intends to ensure that any conclusions and reforms from the SEND review are aligned and implemented alongside this white paper?
I'm grateful for my honourable friend's question. That is exactly what we have done, and I hope we can demonstrate that in today's work, but also tomorrow's Green Paper, the knitting together of how we deliver that support to parents with children with special educational needs in our mainstream education system, because actually every mainstream school should be a great SEND school, and of course the work we're doing on alternative provision as well. We'll set out more details tomorrow.
Nira Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the first schools white paper in 6 years coming on the back of a pandemic that was so brutal for our children and young people, this really feels like a missed opportunity for children, parents and school staff up and down the country. Where is the ambition in this? Where is this is a unique opportunity to broaden the offer in terms of academic achievement, broader life skills that parents and employers want, as well as well-being. Has the Secretary of State had his hands tied by a Chancellor who's more focused on his own ambitions than the ambitions of our children and young people?
Very good.
I'm slightly surprised, the Honourable Lady, because I did brief her personally on the details of the white paper. But nevertheless, if she reads the white paper, she'll see that we're ambitious for a knowledge-rich curriculum. We also have made it very clear in the white paper that we will have a strategy for everything, from sport to music to culture, because it is that evidence of everything from extracurricular activities to pastoral care and behaviour that makes the real difference in the high-performing families of school, which I want to see in every part of the country.
Nick Fletcher.
Mr. Speaker, this is great news for the young people of our country.
And Madam Deputy Speaker, it's specifically good news for the people of Doncaster, as Doncaster is now a priority education investment area. And this will give my young constituents the boost they need to level up their opportunities. My only concern is with the welcome again, 500,000 teacher training opportunities. Will this not result in more teacher training days and therefore result in more days out of school for our young learners?
No.
Ian Mearns.
Grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, and as a member of the Education Select Committee for just short of 12 years, I have to say that some evidence-led policy would be a welcome departure for this government. But on teacher recruitment and retention, there is a bit in the white paper on aims to improve the workforce, but not on the how and the what with. There's no involvement for teaching universities in the Institute of Teaching, and with recruitment and retention continuing to pose enormous challenges for many schools, particularly in disadvantaged areas, the white paper seems to pay scant attention on how schools in disadvantaged areas will be able to recruit and then retain specialist teachers in, say, for instance, maths or physics.
I'm grateful for the honourable friend's question. We are making sure that those teachers, especially in those areas that are education investment areas, in subjects like maths and physics, actually have that incentive, £3,000 tax-free. Many of them will want to go to those areas if they feel they have the support in place, and that's why we want that strong family of schools working together in a high-performing multi-academy trust to offer that support that we saw so visibly during the pandemic.
Catherine Fletcher.
May I thank the Secretary of State for the focus on outcomes, which is so important for the children of South Ribble. 3 of South Ribble's primary schools have joined with 2 primary schools in South Ribble Borough to form an Axia, let me get this right, Axia Learning Alliance, which is a cooperative trust. Now, I confess I know very little about those, so is the Secretary of State and his ministers going to be considering this as part of his future proposals?
I'm grateful for my honourable friend's question. It is through that family of schools, the multi-academy trusts that are tightly managed and high-performing, that we think we can deliver the greatest outcomes for children. I would happily look at what her schools are doing in their area, but it is that strongly held together, really well managed, sharing evidence that delivers the outcomes.
His white paper says it marks the start of a journey. Quite why it's taken 12 years to start a journey to raise standards will be beyond the understanding of most parents, staff and children. If he wants to learn from the evidence of successful and sustained improvement in schools, will he apply the lessons of collaboration and support from the London Challenge, which transformed education standards in the capital and didn't involve a name change on the badge above the door?
I will look at any evidence and learn from it. I would just remind my honourable friend that he speaks about what have we done. In 2019, 65% of Key Stage 2 pupils reached the expected standard in all of reading, writing and maths. Now, we want to go much further. We want to go to 90%. But that was, in 2019, a 7 percentage point increase in reading and 9 percentage point increase in maths. Since 2016, that is what we've done.
Martin Vickers.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, and particularly welcome the focus on multi-academy trusts, of which we have some very successful ones in northern Lincolnshire. But education, like the rest of the public sector, find it very difficult to attract the best quality professionals to that part of the country. Could my right honourable friend give an assurance that there will be some focus on that, and he will work with the schools and the councils to achieve that?
Yes, very much so, and that's exactly why in the Levelling Up White Paper, Madam Deputy Speaker, you will know that the most valuable resource on earth is human capital, and that is why we are flexing the system towards those education investment areas and education investment areas plus to deliver those high quality, highly qualified teachers to make sure those schools get the benefit of other schools around the country. I don't believe that people are less talented in Knowsley than those in Kensington. What the difference is they don't have the same opportunity. That's what I'm absolutely passionate about making sure we deliver on.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank
Thank you. Can I first of all say to the Secretary of State that education is a big passion of mine and thank him for his recent announcement that Tameside is to be an education improvement area. With that, the focus on skills, on outcomes and on opportunities is absolutely key, and we can't do that in substandard education buildings. It would be remiss of me not to mention the case of Russell Scott Primary School in Denton, which has been dubbed as Britain's worst rebuilt school. There's a bid into the Department for Education. Can we have that new school that those kids so desperately deserve?
I'm grateful for my friend. I know he's passionate and I know he wants to work constructively, and I appreciate that. And I know the bid is in, I know the schools minister is looking at all bids, but he makes a very powerful point, and I would happily work with him because I know he'll care about the evidence, sadly unlike his front bench do.
Backward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Having married into a family of teachers, I know how talented and passionate many of our teachers are, but we also know that many teacher training courses include very little content on learning difficulties or speech and language conditions. Will my right honourable friend make sure that all teachers receive the SEND training that they need to give every child the best possible start in life, both through initial teacher training but also through continuing development?
Thank you very much. He raised a very powerful point, and we are considering an MPQ for special educational needs, as well as, of course, early intervention. He'll hear more about it from me tomorrow in the Green Paper announcement.
Hamid Yassin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Schools in Bedford and Kempston, like everywhere else, have been through the most difficult period of disruption and having to do so on reduced budgets. Not once in any conversation with heads, teachers or parents desperate for support has anyone asked for more targets. So if we were not meeting them before the pandemic, why the Secretary of State thinks increasing targets is going to do anything but add more stress to children and drive more teachers from the profession?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I hope he was listening when I spoke about England rising up the league tables, international league tables around the world. That's because we're so focused on making sure we back our teachers, we train them well, and of course then we target that effort, including on the such a successful programme as the phonics screening check. I disagree with him respectfully. We do need targets, hence why the primary target of 90% in maths and English is important, and the GCSE average target going up from 4.5 to 5 is so important.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretaries of State and I both have excellent Warwickshire grammar schools in our constituencies. Could you say a little about the role of grammars in raising standards?
Grateful to my honourable friend and neighbour. I have 3 grammar schools in my constituency, all high performing, and the DNA of grammar schools is what we want to make sure we spread across the system. There are 165 grammar schools out of an education system of 22,000. Many of them have already joined and are leading multi-academy trust. There's high-performing, strong multi-academy trust. I want more of them to do the same, and they will join us on this journey.
Zeichner.
Thank you. I'm concerned the Secretary of State may be underestimating the damage that's being done to some children caused by the isolation during the pandemic. That's certainly what I'm hearing from schools in Cambridge. And we know that that can be addressed through more interventions and more resources. But in a county like Cambridgeshire, which remains one of the most poorly funded in the country, is there anything in this white paper to address that?
I'm grateful to honourable members' question. Mental health has been one of the areas that we've been looking at with the Children's Commissioner and her very good Big Ask survey of 500,000 children. In May of last year, we announced 17 million of investment to build the mental health support in education settings. And we've also invested further to make sure that mental health leads in over 8,000 schools and colleges have that support and that knowledge to be able to support young people.
Ben Spencer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome this white paper, and I thank my right honourable friend for his passion and drive to deliver the best possible education to all our children, no matter where they live or what their background is across the country. I caught up with some of my local school leaders this morning, as I do on a regular basis, and they were interested to hear about what's coming up in this announcement, but naturally there was a bit of trepidation of further change on the back of the COVID pandemic. Would he agree with me that we make sure that these changes are streamlined to cause the minimum disruption to our school teachers as possible?
My honourable friend raises a really important point. The front line, the 461,000 teachers, 217,000 teaching assistants, the support staff, the leaders in our education system have gone above and beyond to deliver, to make sure that schools reopened, stayed open, and dealt with Omicron as well. We've looked very carefully at the evidence, which is why one of the things we have not done is change the curriculum. A knowledge-rich curriculum is important to make sure we deliver for those outcomes that we so passionately want to deliver on for young people.
Bedford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Secretary of State is going to deliver on his package here, which has been announced 12 years into a Conservative government, we're going to have to fund it. If you want decent teachers in front of classrooms, you're going to have to pay them. So where is the funding for decent teachers in this package? If you're going to improve schools, they need the resources to do it. So is there anything in this package that's going to increase per pupil funding?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. £7 billion, front-loaded £4 billion this year and next year, £5 billion for recovery. That is the investment, that is the commitment that we make when he, as I did this morning, speak to school leaders like the great head at Manega that I met today. She will tell him that this is doable. They are outstanding. They've turned the school around in 5 years to an outstanding school. We want to spread that good practice and that quality leadership across the system.
Richard Fuller.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State for his ambition and for making Bedfordshire an education investment area, but draw his attention in particular to a point in his white paper that looks to scrutinise and challenge off-rolling from schools. He will know that off-rolling unchecked can undermine trust even in the best system. So can I ask you to pay particular attention to that?
He's absolutely right. And one of the things, the opportunity I have to knit together a system between our white paper and, of course, the SEND and AP green paper is to make sure that behaviour no longer happens. And actually, AP is not seen as a sort of warehousing for forgotten children, but actually high-quality alternative provision has a place to play in our education system.
Leila Moran.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Education is the joint top sector affected by long COVID, joint with social care above healthcare. However, I haven't seen anything yet from the department about how maths will help those teachers with long COVID. I'm aware, for example, of a head teacher who's chosen to take early retirement because they kept getting written warnings from the MAT rather than being supported. That's not going to help workforce retention. Would the Secretary of State meet with me to discuss how we can support teachers and heads who have long COVID?
I will happily meet with the Honourable Lady.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The ambition for all children that shone through my right honourable friend's statement is to be warmly welcomed, but at the start of his statement he rightly acknowledged that children with special educational needs are less likely to achieve the ambition we all want for them. In my constituency, time and time again, I hear too many heartbreaking cases from families where a cause of that is the length of time it takes for an EHCP to be signed off. Can you give me an assurance that the action that comes from this white paper and tomorrow's SEND review will tackle that barrier?
Yes, I can.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement today. The parent pledge that the Secretary of State delivered today is ambitious and entirely necessary. I know the report in Northern Ireland showed children are 8 months behind where they will normally be. The paper today is for England and Wales, but the problem is UK-wide, and so the solution must also be UK-wide. So what discussions has the Secretary of State had with devolved counterparts to ensure that this approach is in every area of the United Kingdom?
My honourable friend will know that education is devolved, but we happily share all the evidence. We share our strategy with our colleagues in the devolved administrations, and I'm happy to continue that in the spirit of collaboration to share the evidence. England has in many ways, been evidencing what works, and we're happy to share that.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome Stoke-on-Trent being announced as a prioritised education investment area, and this will help to continue the significant work being done to improve standards in education that teachers have been working on in Stoke-on-Trent. And would my right honourable friend agree that improving standards of education is absolutely vital to both levelling up standards and unleashing the real potential of places like Stoke-on-Trent?
I thank my honourable friend. I would absolutely agree. I am the beneficiary of great education. The greatest determinant is having a great teacher, an inspirational teacher in the classroom. That's why much of the focus of this white paper is backing teachers, making sure that they get the qualifications and the professional development that they need to do their job properly.
Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the positive and progressive statement from my right honourable friend. I pay tribute to the pupils and teachers in my constituency in Penrith and the Border for all their resilience and tremendous hard work throughout the pandemic. But can my right honourable friend reassure my constituents that pupils will receive all the targeted and tailored support and tutoring that they need, and more broadly, the mental health and pastoral support that they need moving forward?
He raises two excellent points. The work that we've done on the National Tutoring Programme allowed us to make the parent pledge because I saw the evidence as to how that focus on where an individual child has got gaps in their knowledge and then the engagement with parents makes a real difference. And of course, his point on mental health I've addressed earlier.
Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a parent and a former teacher, can I say I wholeheartedly welcome this white paper. It is ambitious, but it's also a common sense approach. And can I particularly commend the use of common sense plain English in the white paper, which is very accessible to parents, and perhaps my right honourable friend could pass on some tips to some other departments. I just want to pick up on one sentence that's repeated a couple of times in the white paper. The quality of teaching is the single most important in-school factor in improving outcomes for children. And I completely agree with that, and I welcome the reform to teacher training. But does my right honourable friend acknowledge that children spend the majority of their time at home rather than in school? And so can he set out how this will work alongside the government's programmes on strengthening and supporting families, because that will have just as important an effect on improving outcomes?
My honourable friend raises a really important question. So I have focused the department, Madam Deputy Speaker, on skills, and the Skills Minister and the Higher Education, Further Education Minister are both on the front bench. I know later on today we'll be voting through what will then become, I hope, the revolution in the skills landscape that this country so badly needs and deserves. So skills, schools, and the Schools White Paper delivers on what we want to do, what we want to achieve to make sure every child has the opportunity of a great education, the right place at the right time for them, and then families. Because families are important, whether it be in mainstream education or, of course, with children and the social care system. And she will hear more from us on the family hubs that we will deliver in half of England's local authorities.
Higginbottom.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since 2010, the number of good and outstanding schools in Burnley and Padiham has increased. And we can see in pupil attainment the impact that has. That's not just numbers on a page. That is life chances improving in our local communities. And that's why we need to drive even harder, because education is the heart of levelling up. So could the Secretary of State set out what this white paper will do for those pupils who need targeted intervention in individual subjects to help drive them forward?
Grateful for my honourable friend's question. He will, I hope, see in the white paper, in the annex, the evidence that strong, high-performing multi-academy trusts really do deliver the best outcomes, and that's what that's my vision for the whole country. On the parent pledge, yes, it is about children who fall behind in English language and maths, but actually teachers that I've seen in those high-performing multi-academy trusts look at not just English and maths, but other subjects as well as pastoral care and curriculum work that makes the difference.
Clark-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his excellent statement today? We also endorse the words of my right honourable friend, the Chairman of the Select Committee, on the importance of oracy skills in schools. And I went to see an excellent initiative in my own constituency at Silby Park Academy in Burcote. So, coupled with the government's commitment to get 90% of primary school children up to the reading, writing and maths standards by 2030, does my right honourable friend agree with me that driving up these standards in primary schools not only improves outcomes there, but also throughout a child and a young person's entire educational journey and then beyond?
The wise words of a teacher and a great head teacher.
I thank the Education Secretary for his statement, and we now have Foreign Secretary statement. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. Foreign Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, with permission, I want to update the House on behalf of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, on the NATO and G7 leaders' meetings in Brussels last week. Together with our allies, we agreed to keep the pressure up on Putin to end his appalling war in Ukraine through tougher sanctions to debilitate the Russian economy, supplying weapons to Ukraine and boosting NATO's eastern flank, providing humanitarian aid and dealing with the wider consequences of this crisis, and supporting Ukraine in any negotiations they undertake. Strength is the only thing Putin understands. Our sanctions are pushing back the Russian economy by years, and we owe it to the brave Ukrainians to keep up our tough approach to get peace. And we owe it to ourselves to stand with them for the cause of freedom and democracy in Europe and across the world. It is vital we step up this pressure. We cannot wait for more appalling atrocities to be committed in Ukraine. We know that the impact of sanctions degrades over time. That is why we need to act now. Next week, NATO foreign ministers will meet to follow up on the statements of leaders, and I will be pressing our allies over the next weeks for all of us to do more. On oil and gas, the UK has already committed to end imports of Russian oil by the end of this year. We must agree a clear timetable with our partners across the G7 to end dependence on Russian oil and gas permanently. On banks, we've already sanctioned 16 major Russian banks. We've hit Gazprom Bank and we've placed a clear prohibition on Sberbank, Russia's largest bank. We want to see others adopt these sanctions and go further. On individuals, we've cracked down on oligarchs like Roman Abramovich. Last week, we sanctioned the despicable Wagner group of mercenaries. On ports, Britain has banned entry to all of our ports by Russian vessels. I will be lobbying our partners across the G7 to join us in stopping Russian ships. We must maximise the flow of weapons that are being supplied to Ukraine under the UN Charter of Self-Defence. The UK was the first European country to start sending lethal aid to Ukraine. We are doubling our support with a further 6,000 missiles, including NLAWs and Javelin anti-tank weapons. And we're now equipping our Ukrainian friends with anti-aircraft Starstreak missiles. We're also strengthening NATO's eastern flank, deploying troops to Bulgaria, and doubling the numbers of troops in Poland and Estonia. We're coordinating deliveries with our allies, and we want others to join us in getting Ukraine what it needs. The UK is providing £220 million in humanitarian support to help the people of Ukraine, from shelters to heaters to medicine. Today, we announced our partnership with Australia to fly out more relief, including blankets, cooking equipment and power generators. And we're getting supplies directly into Ukraine's encircled cities with £2 million of canned food, water and dried food. As refugees come into countries like Poland, we are working with the UNHCR so they are informed about the UK's Homes for Ukraine scheme. This scheme has already got over 150,000 applications, thanks to the generosity of the British public. We know that Putin is not serious about talks. He is still wantonly bombing innocent citizens across Ukraine. And that is why we need to do more to ensure that he loses and we force him to think again. We must not just stop Putin in Ukraine, but we must also look to the long term. We need to ensure that any future talks don't end up selling Ukraine out or repeating the mistakes of the past. We remember the uneasy settlement of 2014, which failed to give Ukraine lasting security. Putin just came back for more. That is why we cannot allow him to win from this appalling aggression, and why this government is determined Putin's regime should be held to account at the International Criminal Court. We will work to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. We set up a negotiation unit to ensure the strongest possible support is available to the Ukrainians alongside our international partners. We've played a leading role alongside our G7 allies in driving the response to Putin's war, and I want to ensure that unity continues. Sanctions were put on by the G7 in unison, and they shouldn't be removed as long as Putin continues with his war and he still has troops in Ukraine. That is not all. We need to ensure that Putin can never act in this aggressive way again. Any long-term settlement needs to include a clear sanctions snapback, which would be triggered automatically by any Russian aggression. In the aftermath of Putin's war, Ukraine will need our help to build back. In these exceptional circumstances, we have a duty to step up with a new reconstruction plan for rebuilding Ukraine, and we will work with the international community to do this. At this defining moment, the free world has shown a united response. Putin is not making the progress he craves, and he is still not serious about talks. President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people know that everybody in the United Kingdom stands firm with them. We were the first European country to recognise Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union. 30 years on, we're the first to strengthen their defences against Putin's invasion and lead the way in our support. Over the next week, I will be working to drive forward progress in unison with our allies. Together, we can secure a lasting peace which restores Ukraine's sovereignty. Together, we can ensure Putin fails and Ukraine prevails. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of her statement and the continued briefings on Privy Council terms. It's now more than a month since Vladimir Putin launched his barbaric and illegal invasion with horrifying results. Buildings razed to the ground, maternity hospitals bombed, the city of Mariupol turned into a living hell. Ukraine is the victim of a bandit regime willing to use violence in an attempt to subjugate its neighbour. But the 24th of February marked not only an attack on the people of Ukraine, it was an attempt to crush the values of democracy, rule of law and freedom that we all enjoy. There can be no excuses for Putin's actions, and one day soon I hope he will be held to account for what I consider to be war crimes. Madam Deputy Speaker, day by day it's become clearer that despite Putin's brutal tactics, he is not winning. A month ago, many people gave Ukraine's resistance little chance. Many expected Russia's armed forces to sweep into Kyiv in days, frankly. Yet still, Ukraine's forces hold firm. Their skill, their bravery and resolve has inspired the world. Putin's invasion may have stalled, but the threat he poses remains. Reports suggest he may be seeking a way out. We want to see an end to the bloodshed and the restoration of Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure the Foreign Secretary will agree with me that any ceasefire agreement must enjoy the full support of the democratically elected government of Ukraine. If an agreement is reached, there will be no return to the previous status quo in our economic relationship with Russia. Putin's regime must still pay a long-term cost for its war of aggression. We must decisively end our dependence on fossil fuels and move rapidly towards cheap, homegrown renewables to support our energy sector. And we must complete the unfinished task of ending Britain's role as the hub of dirty money from Russia and elsewhere. As this war remains in the balance, we must do what we can to ensure that we tip it towards Ukraine. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased the NATO, EU and G7 summits last week have reinforced Western unity. It is right that NATO has agreed to bolster the eastern flank with the approval of 4 additional battle groups, and I welcome the commitment to increase and strengthen capabilities as well as cybersecurity assistance, financial and humanitarian aid. But can I ask the Foreign Secretary the scale of the UK's contribution? Last week's commitment shows NATO's long-term strategy is quickly evolving. Other European allies who are reviewing defence spending are boosting their armed services. I was in Berlin last week, where our colleagues in Germany have committed to a historic investment in defence. Finland, Sweden and Denmark all announcing reviews or extra resources for the defence. Does the Foreign Secretary really believe it's right at this time for the UK to cut the army by 10,000 in the next few years? If not, will she act on Labour's call to halt these cuts? It's time too for Britain to return to the table when it comes to European security. Will the Foreign Secretary tell the Prime Minister to stop picking petty squabbles with our neighbours on the continent and instead deepen security cooperation that will keep us all safe? Madam Deputy Speaker, last week G7 leaders EU leaders focused on closing loopholes on existing sanctions rather than imposing new measures. There remain many gaps in the UK's regime. Trusts are not fully covered, many Russian banks are not designated, ownership thresholds are too high, and we need to ensure effective enforcement, including of the overseas territories and crown dependencies. Can the Foreign Secretary tell us what her government is doing to close these loopholes and whether she plans to put further sanctions in place? Madam Deputy Speaker, a month on from this illegal invasion, the world has changed. The unity across this House, this country and across the international community must endure. But the next few days and weeks will be crucial, and we send all our support to the people of Ukraine. As this war enters a new phase, we must all adapt and hold our nerves. Through the darkness of terror and destruction, Zelensky's democratic government remains in control against all the odds. Bravery is shining through.
For a second.
Well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. This is about the future of freedom and democracy. It's about the future of European security. And the Ukrainians and President Zelensky are fighting bravely, and they are fighting not just for their own future, but they're also fighting for all of our futures, and they deserve all of the help that we can give them, both the humanitarian support, the support in terms of lethal aid, and of course the moral and diplomatic support that we are providing. He's also right to say that Putin must not gain from this appalling aggression. There will be no letting up on sanctions. We want to see sanctions tightening, and Putin will pay the cost. He will be held to account in the International Criminal Court. We are working with our allies to collect evidence, and of course we need to make sure that Ukraine is rebuilt and the appalling devastation that the people of Ukraine has experienced is rebuilt following this appalling war. And he's also right that we do want to see sanctions increase. In the case of banks, the UK has put on the most bank sanctions of any of our allies. We want to see our allies follow suit, and we want to do more in terms of completely de-swifting the Russian economy, in terms of tackling banks like Sberbank, which are of strategic importance. We also sanction more oligarchs now and other entities than either the EU or the US. And we want to do more, we will do more, and we want to see our partners do more. But the most crucial thing of all is cutting off the supply of finance that is provided from oil and gas. That is what will completely debilitate the Putin regime. That is why we want to see a very clear timetable agreed with the G7 to completely end dependence on Russian oil and gas. And we must never go back there. We must never be in a position where we are dependent on an authoritarian regime for core parts of our economic survival. That is absolutely vital. And we do have an opportunity with next week's NATO summit, next week's grouping, to be able to move forward on those plans. And I would encourage all of our allies to work with us on this, because it is the only thing Putin will understand is tougher sanctions as well as more defensive aid. We have boosted our defence spending. We continue in talks with our NATO allies about boosting the eastern flank. And the UK is also leading with the Joint Expeditionary Force, working with our allies around Europe. I talk to my European counterparts all the time. We are committed to boosting European security and working with our friends right across the EU.
John Barron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Perhaps for too long, the West has, in a way, harvested the peace dividend. But there's no doubt now that we have entered a new era for the battle for democracy globally. May I urge my right honourable friend to do what she can within government, not only to make for a sustained and substantial increase in defence spending, but also to ensure that actually our soft power capabilities are also adequately resourced, for the very simple reason that George war should always be preferable to war, and we need to make sure it's sufficiently resourced, as I said.
Well, my honourable friend makes a good point about the peace dividend. The reality is that right across the West, not enough was spent on defence. Meanwhile, the Russians were building up their armed forces, they were building up their military capability, and they were also building up their disinformation efforts as well. And one of the things I have done is re-established an information unit in the Foreign Office to tackle Russian disinformation, and we are working to get that information into Russia so that the people of Russia have a clear view about what is going on, not the propaganda from their government. And we're also working on expanding our soft power as well, whether it's through the BBC or other outlets, to get the truth across to the people of Russia. And as to his other point, I'm sure it's an issue that he will be raising with the Chancellor at Treasury Questions very soon.
SNP spokesperson Alan Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm also grateful for advance sight of the statement, and would also commend the Foreign Secretary on the very open approach that she's taken to briefing parties across the House on this crucial issue. The SNP stands part of the international coalition to defend Ukraine and defend international law, so I do welcome the coordination across the EU, G7 and NATO as well. We support the provision of arms and the further provision of arms to Ukraine. We support particularly the establishment of the negotiations unit to help the Ukrainians negotiate properly. I share her scepticism about President Putin's good faith, but let's remember every single Cold War dispute did end with a negotiated outcome of some sort. So we do need to keep up that support. I'd also very strongly welcome the support for accountability for war crimes, which we do need to think towards the peace at the end of the war. On sanctions, I'm glad to see that this is ramping up. Can she confirm to the House that the intention is to mirror across the G7 and the EU, one person or bank being sanctioned in one territory is going to be mirrored in other territories, and when will that be achieved? I appreciate there's different legal backgrounds that we're all coming from on this, but I think it is important that we set a timescale to matching each other's sanctions. On refugees, this is where there is a considerable difference between the SNP and the government on this. We would have far rather seen the UK mirror the EU's approach by waiving visas for 3 years. We think that would have been generous and proportionate. That was not the case. So I welcome the fact that the Homes for Ukraine scheme has had 150,000 applications, but I think the far more meaningful statistic is how many of them have actually been fulfilled. Can she tell us that? And if she can't tell us that, then I think we need to do a little bit less self-congratulating about the Homes for Ukraine scheme. And I do say that constructively. Does she share my concern that the Home Office needs a lot more resource to process these applications properly? And can she confirm that that discussion is underway? I'd also, on a more general point, to close, Madam Deputy Speaker, would she agree that the integrated review is now rather badly out of date? And would she give us any indication on thinking within government about updating and refreshing it? Because it strikes me that needs to be done rather urgently. Thank you.
So first of all, on sanctions, I think it's worth saying that we are aligned with our allies on key areas of sanctions already, including banning Russian state and private companies from capital markets, in terms of also areas like stopping the Russian government from raising sovereign debt. In areas like oligarchs, we have now sanctioned more oligarchs than either the EU or the US. And we've also sanctioned more banks than the EU. So what we want to achieve next week is we want to see a levelling up across all of the sanction areas. Some of that will mean other countries following what the UK has already done. So, for example, we've banned vessels from Russian vessels from UK ports, which I remember discussing a few weeks with the Honourable Gentleman. And then we all need to go further. So I'm very clear we should all go further in terms of SWIFT. We want to see a complete ban on the Russians' use of the SWIFT system, but we need to keep going with our allies, and that is the work that we are doing, putting pressure, working with our allies, because in the case of oil and gas, many European countries are heavily dependent on Russian gas. They do need to find alternatives. We are helping and working, as are the United States. This is very much a team effort. On the issue he raises about the Home for Ukraine scheme, I know that my right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, will be issuing new information about that later this week, and I'm sure the honourable gentleman will be very keen to attend his session to hear more details.
Croft.
Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend mentions the BBC. Well, the top of the BBC news this morning was that an actor had walloped a comedian at an American awards ceremony. Does she agree with me that we must do all we can to ensure that the horrific stories that are coming out of the Ukraine remain high on the news agenda? I think that's really important. And will she reassure my constituents in Scunthorpe that the Ukrainian situation remains at the very top of her agenda and that she will continue the really good work that she has been doing for however long it takes?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes a very good point about the priorities that people put on various events. What we have seen, the appalling aggression we have seen in Ukraine, is an epoch-defining moment, and we will absolutely not forget it, and we will not make the mistakes of the past of ignoring and normalising Russian behaviour. This is the time we have to make sure that Putin loses, and we have to tackle Russian aggression for the long term. And I will continue to work on that together with our allies across the world, and we will not let this issue drop.
Tony Lloyd.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I point out to the Foreign Secretary that most of Ukraine's neighbours are protected by EU and NATO membership. One that isn't is Moldova. And Moldova has already taken in huge numbers of refugees. Would you agree with me, particularly because of the situation of Transnistria, it's vitally important that we're also able to offer some support to the democratic Moldovan government, who shares our values and aspirations, but is in a very powerless state?
The honourable gentleman is completely right about Moldova. We're working very closely with our allies to provide direct support to Moldova and also help them with the refugee situation. This is something that we discussed at the G7 meeting, and we will be working further on over the next week.
Sir William Cash.
His honourable friend rightly refers to the necessity for a clear timetable with respect to Russian oil and gas. But in particular, I would like to ask her a question about the German issue, because Germany does have a vast dependence upon Russia. The amount of time it is going to take to get it right, if it ever is got right, is going to be considerable. So what is the problem? How is the problem going to be resolved in the short term? Because the problem for Ukraine is short term, and the quicker we resolve it, the better. And the problem is that Germany effectively is bankrolling Russia at the moment.
Well, I've been talking to my German counterpart, as has the Energy Secretary, about what can be done to work with Germany to help them move away from Russian gas, Russian oil and Russian coal. And in fact, the United States have also been working with Germany and the EU on supplying LNG. And Germany have undertaken a complete change in their energy policy and defence policy. They're now investing in new LNG terminals. They're looking at where else they can get that energy from. And we are very, very keen to work with them, and indeed other European countries, because we cannot be in a position where Europe is dependent on Russian gas. That does not help the security for the German people. It also doesn't help the security of the British people. So it's in our interest to work together to end dependence.
Leila Moran.
We can't all help but be moved by the scenes that are still going on, not least the 300 killed in that theatre just last week. And the 3.8 million who have now crossed into borders nearby. Many of them will have ties to our country, and we should all be proud of every single person who've said they want to take someone in. But she will also know that many are struggling for means. They left with nothing, and to get to this country, they would even struggle to get on a flight. Is the government considering chartering airlift flights from the border so that those who can get through the mire of paperwork we put in front of them, that the Liberal Democrats put on record shouldn't be there, but they are, can then get to this country and take up those safe homes that have been so generously offered?
Well, we are working to support people who do want to come to the United Kingdom through the family scheme and also the Homes for Ukrainians scheme. In fact, there is considerable transport being offered. Wizz Air are offering free flights to the United Kingdom. There are free Eurostar journeys as well. We're working with the UNHCR to make sure that information is available. So at present, the issue of getting to the UK is being resolved, and as the Honourable Lady says, we are making sure those visa processes are happening, and that is the responsibility of the Home Office.
Julian Lewis.
Deputy Speaker, will she make sure that a reasonable proportion of the extra £4.1 million that the government has rightly given to the BBC in respect of the World Service is earmarked for the BBC monitoring service, and in particular the Russian and Ukrainian parts of the monitoring service?
Yes, I will make sure that's the case.
Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm afraid the system isn't humane that she's outlined. My constituent's mother-in-law is in Dublin, just an hour, less than an hour's flight from Cardiff, and can't come to stay with her family in Cardiff because they're on a global talent visa for the next 2 years and therefore don't qualify for the family scheme. And they're being told to apply under the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which is ludicrous since they're in rented temporary accommodation whilst they're here. Can she have a word with her ministerial colleagues in the Home Office to stop this nonsense and allow people in on what every member of this House, if they were the constituency MP, would say the same as me? It's absolutely ludicrous, and can they do something about it?
Well, I'll certainly happily take forward the Honourable Gentleman's case with the Home Secretary.
Mandel.
Deputy Speaker, can the Foreign Secretary say a little bit more about the humanitarian aid? Because, as she's aware, many volunteers, such as those at the Ukrainian chapel in my constituency, have effectively stood back from the enormous efforts that they were making in trying to get necessities to Ukraine and the countries surrounding it. And I'm sure they'll want to be reassured that the humanitarian effort by the government and indeed by the Disasters Emergency Committee is actually delivering what they would want it to do.
Well, I can tell my honourable friend that the DEC appeal has now raised over £200 million and that we are deploying our aid into Ukraine. I've talked about the work we're doing with the Australians. We are supplying food into the encircled cities as well. I think the biggest challenge is some of those cities, so it's actually a security challenge getting the aid into the cities. We certainly are well funded for the work we're doing, and in fact the Ukrainian government themselves are doing a lot of the logistical support into Ukraine of making sure the supplies get there. But the issue really is about the security, and we have pushed very hard for genuine humanitarian corridors to be set up. I'm afraid to say the Russians have not properly done that, and it is dangerous in some cases getting those supplies in. So certainly constituents can be reassured that we have the funding, we have the supplies. The key thing that we are working on with the international agencies is actually making sure it safely reaches its destination. That is the issue we face.
Caroline Lucas.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last week in an FCDO press release, the Foreign Secretary said that Russian intelligence services have targeted UK national infrastructure in what she called a calculated and dangerous hacking campaign, and that Putin is sowing division and confusion among allies. So when she rightly says in that same press release that she will not tolerate it, can she reassure the House that she is urging the Prime Minister and the Cabinet to open an investigation into the Intelligence and Security Committee's Russia report on Kremlin-linked influence in the UK? Will she admit that it's just simply not helpful that this report still hasn't been investigated?
Well, we have had this question before, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we have followed through on the recommendations of the report and making sure United Kingdom infrastructure is protected.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend my right honourable friend and the Prime Minister on the actions that they have taken in supporting Ukraine, recognised by President Zelensky, in both humanitarian aid, in lethal aid, and in providing the most supportive scheme for families in Ukraine fleeing those horrors. But does my right honourable friend recognise that or agree that there will be a consequence on the Western world that is calculated by President Putin, and that will be higher food prices, higher energy prices, and there will be an impact on the economies in the Western world? So can I ask my right honourable friend to continue to play a coordinating role to ensure that the Western world responds in the most robust way, and that all members of the House should come together in recognising the economic impact they'll have?
Well, it's certainly true that the crisis is having an impact on energy costs, on food costs here in the United Kingdom. The Chancellor announced his spring statement last week to help address some of those costs that are being faced. We also, though, have to be clear about the cost of doing nothing. The cost of doing nothing is huge. This is about European security, about the future of freedom and democracy, and what we know is the people of Ukraine are paying an incredibly high cost at the moment. The other point I wanted to make is it's not just about the Western world. There are real issues about global food security now. And one of the things that we are working on as part of our new international development strategy is making sure that we support people across the world. There will be increased demand for food. There are concerns about food supply. We are working very, very closely with our allies about how we ameliorate those effects, which obviously could have not just food security and humanitarian consequences, but also global security consequences if we don't get it right.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Ukrainian army, with their skill and their bravery, are showing that the Russian war machine can be stopped in its tracks. Now, the Secretary of State said a moment ago that we will learn lessons. And one of those lessons surely has to be that over 12 years, we've seen a systematic reduction in the size of the British Army. There's been a sense that this government hasn't really got an idea what it wants the British Army to do. So can we now expect a statement from the government that the current plans for further reducing the size of the British Army are going to be stopped, and that instead we're going to have a strategic approach that recognises alongside cyber, alongside the sort of terrorist threats we face, we also need to be ready to face these major state threats. And that can't be done overnight because a huge amount of skill and experience has been lost from the British Army already, and we need that investment and we need that strategic plan from the government now. Will we get a statement to say we're going to get it?
Well, I would point out to the honourable gentleman that Operation Orbital, led by the United Kingdom to train up 20,000 Ukrainian troops, has actually been a very, very important part of the success of the Ukrainian forces in being able to resist. And I pay huge tribute to the bravery of the Ukrainian forces, but the UK has led on supplying that sort of support and training. And of course we need a comprehensive offer. That's what we are doing. We are modernising our armed forces under the leadership of the Defence Secretary, but we're also supplying more direct support into the eastern flank of NATO to make sure that we are protecting European security at this vital time.
Peter Bone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Evil human trafficking gangs are now operating in the countries bordering Ukraine. They prey on young women and older girls. They promise them safe passage and a new home. What they receive is being moved hundreds of miles away and forced into prostitution. Madam Deputy Speaker, imagine fleeing a war zone in Ukraine, reaching a safe country, and then finding yourself locked in a room hundreds of miles away and repeatedly raped day in, day out. Madam Deputy Speaker, may I ask the Foreign Secretary what the government and NATO are doing about this?
Well, my honourable friend has a strong record of standing up against the appalling actions by human traffickers, and he is absolutely right. There is a real risk at the border and people being threatened with this, women and girls being threatened with this appalling activities. This is a core part of what our humanitarian aid is supporting, the international agencies protecting this. Of course, these activities are also subject to war crimes investigation, the appalling rape accusations we're seeing taking place in Ukrainian cities as well. And the UK is leading on prevention of violence against women and girls, tackling sexual violence as a red line in war, and we will continue to do that.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has just issued a very strong appeal for an urgent and immediate ceasefire. What is the British government doing to support his call before there is more bombing, more deaths, more people driven into refugee status elsewhere? And could the UN be the medium for bringing about a longer-term peace conference which will bring about some degree, hopefully a real degree, of peace and security for people in the area? And would she also say something about the very brave peace activists in Russia who have risked a great deal in order to speak out against this war?
Of course, we completely support a UN call for the ceasefire, and we have worked at the UN General Assembly to secure the votes of 140 countries against Russia's appalling aggressive action. And this is down to Putin and the Russian government, who have pursued this aggression against an innocent nation who had done absolutely nothing to provoke this aggression. And I do applaud those in Russia who are prepared to stand up against the government and who are prepared to protest against this appalling war. Ultimately, it is for the Russian government to stop their appalling aggression in Ukraine and withdraw the troops. That has to be the precursor to any peaceful resolution of this crisis.
Deputy Speaker, we've seen the incredible determination and bravery of Ukrainian forces defending their territory with many weapons sourced from the UK, and I'm delighted with the announcement that we're going to send 6,000 more missiles. To defend Ukraine's airspace is absolutely crucial, and we hear pleas from Ukraine every day. So I'm delighted about the Starstreak, missiles that we're providing. Could my right honourable friend assure me that in her upcoming meetings with our allies, she will encourage them to provide similar defences to enable the airspace defence?
Well, the weapons that we are providing, including the NLAWs and now the Starstreaks, are having a real impact in Ukraine. And these weapons are produced right across the United Kingdom. The NLAWs are produced in Belfast, so it's also contributing to jobs and growth across the United Kingdom, and it's a very important export for the United Kingdom. In terms of what more we can do, the Defence Secretary has already held a donor conference to encourage other countries to also supply weapons, and we've seen many countries now come forward, including Germany, supplying weapons into Ukraine. And we're also working to supply logistics too. So we are coordinating the delivery of those weapons into Ukraine. As I've said earlier on humanitarian aid, often the difficulty is the final mile, getting the equipment in, and this is where the UK has really been leading the way.
Neil.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm glad to see the Foreign Secretary mentioning food security. It's apparently only 10 days until the planting season starts in Ukraine, and that has obvious problems, need not be expanded on here. But she talked upon the need to go further and to do more. But unfortunately on refugees, the UK government has almost gone nowhere and done least. Leading charities have today called for the scrapping of the visa requirements, and it's reported the weekend that a Conservative councillor resigned from the party due to the hostile and xenophobic policy towards refugees. Surely this is the time to change this. Now, Ireland has taken in 13,500, it's emerged this morning. How many has the UK taken in? And will the government go further and do more for refugees and behave like normal humanitarian countries on this issue?
Tell the honourable gentleman that so far over 20,000 individuals have been approved for the Ukraine Family Scheme. As I've said, the Levelling Up Secretary will be giving an update on the Homes for Ukraine scheme later this week. but we already have 150,000 people registered. So progress is being made, and we are seeing more Ukrainians come to the United Kingdom.
David Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have seen recently an incursion into the NATO zone of a drone. It was an ancient drone, albeit 30 years of age, with no markings on it. With the new conferences coming forward in the next few weeks, would it not now be pertinent to start asking for a safety fly zone so that we can protect our air zone on the borders of the Ukraine and Moldova and all the way up into the Baltics?
Well, what we are doing is maximising the support we are giving under the UN Charter, which allows us to supply Ukraine in their own self-defence. And that is effective. You know, we're seeing the NLAWs being effective. We're now putting in those anti-aircraft missiles, the Starstreak. And that is the way that we are going to support the Ukrainians in defeating Vladimir Putin and ensuring he loses in Ukraine. A no-fly zone would mean direct NATO involvement in Ukraine. That is a very, very different matter from the defence that we're supplying under the UN Charter.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At the UN General Assembly, we've seen some key votes where the vast majority of the world has come together to stand with Ukraine. But we have seen first 37 countries and then 38 countries remaining neutral, either actively or passively abstaining. What work is her department doing to help those countries move into a safer place, whether it's around energy or food dependency, or indeed for their security?
Well, the Honourable Lady is correct. Many countries have been dependent on Russia, sometimes for defence support, sometimes for food, sometimes for trade. And what we need to do, and what we are doing with our allies, is working to increase our trade links, increase our economic links, increase our defence links, as well as engaging with those countries to encourage them to see Russia's actions for what they are. Because if we live in a world where a sovereign state can simply be invaded with impunity, what does that mean for their future? That's the point we are putting to all of these countries. But at the same time, we do recognise there are genuine dependencies. So we have to help those countries find alternative sources of trade or food or indeed defence support to encourage them not to side with Russia.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And further to the question asked by the honourable gentleman, the member for Rochdale, can my right honourable friend update the House on what conversations she had with our G7 and NATO allies when she and the Prime Minister visited Brussels regarding what we can do to bolster other vulnerable countries in the region, such as Moldova?
So we had thorough discussions with our NATO allies, with our G7 allies, on how we can help Moldova, both in terms of direct humanitarian support, support with refugees, but also defensive support to Moldova. And what we have seen is Putin's ambitions are not just about Ukraine, it is about creating a greater Russia. And that threat is, of course, very, very severe in Ukraine, but it is not limited to Ukraine. And as well as bolstering Ukraine and its defences, we want to help countries like Moldova as well.
Tim Farron.
Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary made an excellent point earlier about food security and indeed the prospect of this evil invasion of Ukraine impacting upon a global humanitarian situation, but also affecting us domestically when it comes to food supply. Would you consider two urgent actions in that case? Isn't now the right time for us to restore the amount of aid we give to 0.7% of GDP? And isn't it also right to halt the very foolish progressive reduction in the basic payment scheme for our farmers so we maintain our ability to feed ourselves?
Tree.
Well, I think there are many things we can do to improve food supply. I'm certainly seeing what we can do through our aid budget, and we're looking at our aid strategy at the moment. I completely agree with him that this is a real issue and this is recognised by our friends globally as being a real issue, and we're working on it together. But we also need to look at what we can do to support countries on areas like trade. Increasing trade with like-minded countries is another way of making sure that food supplies are able to flow, and that is something we're also looking at.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I place on record my thanks to the people of Warwick and Leamington for a phenomenal response to this crisis, in particular to members of the Polish community and David Kozlowski, who has actually set up a warehouse 1.5 times the size of this chamber for all the contributions that they've been receiving. Can I ask specifically to the Secretary of State, when it comes to humanitarian aid, can she just elaborate more on the point raised by the Honourable Member for Dumfriesshire about the humanitarian aid going from the UK to not just into Ukraine, but also into neighbouring countries, and how that is being channelled?
Foreign Secretary.
The humanitarian aid is going both directly into Ukraine, and some of that is being delivered by UN agency, by International Red Cross. Some of it is being delivered by the Ukrainian government themselves. In terms of the aid that's supporting in neighbouring countries, we are working through the UN, but we're also working directly with the government of Poland and other neighbouring governments who have an effective system of being able to deliver that aid. So a lot of the aid we are putting in is going to those governments so that they can distribute it. And we're also acting as a deliverer of logistics for third-party governments. So, for example, the Australians have contributed donations. We are then doing the logistics to get that Australian aid into the neighbouring nations, but also directly into Ukraine.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
My constituent Gareth Roberts is presently in Prague with his Ukrainian wife Natalia and her daughter and granddaughter awaiting news of their family visa application. Like many others caught up in this Kafkaesque dystopia of excessive bureaucracy and insufficient capacity, they are beginning to run out of funds. Now, granddaughter Albina has scoliosis. This means she has to wear a brace for 23 hours every day. Comfortable accommodation isn't a luxury for them, it is a necessity. And it's such a necessity that the family are contemplating applying for refugee status in the Czech Republic. Now, I trust the Minister speaks regularly to her Home Office colleagues, so can she confirm that people can form a force by necessity to apply for refugee status in other countries due to slow UK bureaucracy will not then be made ineligible for family visas here in the UK?
Secretary.
Well, what I suggest, the Honourable Lady, is I will take up her case urgently with the Home Office to get it resolved as soon as possible.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like the Honourable Member for Wellingborough, I'm concerned about the mass movement of women and children from Ukraine, opening up opportunities for human trafficking and particularly sex trafficking. At the weekend, it was reported that the Homes for Ukraine scheme risks operating as Tinder for sex traffickers, according to a number of charities. So I just wondered what the Foreign Secretary had to say about that.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, there are criminal justice checks done on all of those participating in the Homes for Ukraine scheme to make sure there is proper safeguarding. I do agree with the Honourable Lady about the very concerning issue of human trafficking at the border. We have over 300 staff in the region working with the international agencies to prevent that from happening. But the Honourable Lady is right, it's a very, very real risk that we take extremely seriously.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Communities across the UK, such as Newport and my constituency, which is twinned with Zolotarevo in Ukraine, have offered accommodation to Ukrainian refugees. And in response to my honourable friend from Oxford West and Abingdon, the Foreign Secretary said that there were some transport options for Ukrainian refugees coming to the UK. But can she advise if additional financial support might be available, and might DEC resources be used for that?
Well, I can tell the Honourable Lady that this support is being put through the UNHCR and the local governments in countries like Poland, who we are working very closely with. There is support, direct financial support being provided, but there is also Wizz Air have opened free flights from Warsaw to the UK, As I've said, Eurostar does as well. So there are a number of routes people can use. The key point is when those refugees cross the border into Poland, they are provided with that information by the Polish government so they can access those resources.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. I want to pay tribute to the Ukrainian armed forces, to the resistance fighters and indeed to ordinary citizens for the fortitude that they've shown in the face of Russian aggression. Look, it's human reaction. I can't help feeling there's more that we can and should be doing to help them at this time. But the Foreign Secretary will have seen media reports about Russia's Plan B being to carve the country into two distinct territorial units politically. In her statement, she says, "We will restore Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty." I agree with her, but what does she mean by this?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, first of all, I think any media reports about what the Russians are planning to do should not be taken at face value. What we know is that Putin is not succeeding his plan, and he is desperate and he could go to any measures, and I think we need to be clear about that. I agree with what President Zelensky has said, that he wants to see the entirety of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty restored. That is what we are supporting him to do.
Jonathan Edwards.
Madam Deputy Speaker. The UN's World Food Programme is warning that the war is creating a shockwave through international food markets, further inflating prices and disrupting supply, which will lead to dire consequences for global hunger. Will she reassure the House that supporting international efforts to alleviate suffering in famine-ravaged countries is a priority for the British Government?
Foreign Secretary.
It is very much a priority. We're working closely with DEFRA, we're working closely with our international counterparts to address this very, very crucial issue.
Bill Esterson.
The Foreign Secretary gave us the figure for the number of Ukrainian refugees who have been approved to come to the UK, but she didn't give us the figure for the number of refugees who have arrived here. Is that because she doesn't know, or perhaps she can tell us why it is she's giving us one figure but not the other? And isn't the logic of what she said about the need for changes to the Home for Ukraine's scheme that the government should introduce a humanitarian visa so that people can come here without all the bureaucracy and the kind of difficulties that we've heard from honourable members this afternoon?
Secretary.
Well, the number I quoted earlier is a Home Office number, and I'm very happy to ask the Home Office to give him the further detail that he's asked for.
Jill Mortimer.
Thank you. My right honourable friend has just said that she thinks that President Putin is getting increasingly desperate and could try anything, in which case how much credibility does she attach to the possibility he could stage an attack against his own people in order to garner further support domestically for his invasion in Ukraine?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm afraid to say what we have seen from President Putin is an attempt to create all kinds of false flag operations, and the UK has been working with the United States to highlight intelligence we have that demonstrates what his playbook is, and that has, we've done that on his claims of a chemical weapon attack. We've done it on his attempts to establish a puppet regime, and will continue to call out his appalling activities.
Kevin Newlands.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say, I think the Foreign Secretary's comments on the economic and jobs advantages of our lethal aid to Ukraine were unintentionally, I'm sure, a little crass and insensitive, and she may want to reflect and clarify those remarks when she looks at Hansard. But people in my constituency and across the country with connections to Ukrainians applying to seek refuge in this country are being met with absurd bureaucratic delays. So what changes are being made now? And further to the point made by my honourable friend, why did the Chancellor not award the Home Office any further funding so they can do more quicker?
Foreign Secretary.
What I say about my comments about the weapons we're supplying is that we do have a good defence industry in the United Kingdom, and the people of Northern Ireland are proud that their products are being used to help defend freedom and democracy.
Dr. Rupert Hart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Foreign Secretary shed light on reports that civil servants working on Afghan resettlement are now being redeployed to Ukraine issues, and just reassure us, while we still have ongoing moral obligations and casework there, that there is bandwidth for the both? And for my constituent Gibran Massoud, who did get out of Ukraine, he was due to sit finals at Dnipro Medical Institute in May. Could she find some sort of equivalence for him, and apparently dozens like him, so that they can do their finals here and benefit our NHS as doctors? They're all British nationals.
Secretary.
Well, I'll see what I can do about the medical students. It was a major focus of our initial evacuation to make sure we successfully help them leave Ukraine in the very difficult circumstances.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the statement and commend the Secretary of State for her strong leadership. Just this morning, a constituent of mine, she's a humanitarian doctor on the border of Ukraine, and is struggling with the things that she said this morning of children horrifically scarred with third-degree burns. Children who face an uncertain and a very painful future, needing plastic surgery and other interventions. I assured this young doctor's family that I would be praying for her, but I would ask the Secretary of State, what more will we do to provide specific medical support for those children, but also importantly, the vital support that is needed to stop the bombings causing this very devastation?
Secretary.
Well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that, of course, these devastating injuries are being caused by President Putin's absolutely appalling aggressive actions in Ukraine. We are helping people with medical emergencies. We are flying people into the United Kingdom to get treated for some of these horrific injuries.
I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement. Point of order, Chris Clarkson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. By convention, when one member is campaigning in another seat, it's considered courtesy to notify that member in advance. I'm aware that the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, the Right Honourable Member for Ashton-under-Lyne, who I have notified in advance, was campaigning in my seat on Saturday, but of course no such courtesy was extended. Now, while that's far from the most egregious discourtesy she's paid me in this place, could I ask your guidance on what can be done to make sure that senior members in particular observe basic courtesy when dealing with other members?
Well, I'm grateful for the Honourable Member giving notice of his point of order and clarifying that he has notified the Honourable Lady of his intention to raise this. I can only reiterate that, as the Rules of Behaviour document makes clear, members should notify colleagues whenever they intend to visit their constituency, except on purely private visits. All reasonable efforts should be taken to notify colleagues in such circumstances, and failure to do